Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. All right, I'll just come out and say it. I saw something on Christmas Eve that I can't explain, and I haven't slept right since. I'm not looking for anyone to believe me. I'm just writing this down because it feels like if I don't, the memory is just going to fester inside me. I need to get it out. It was Christmas Eve last year. A Tuesday, I think. The day had been normal, almost boring. We'd had my wife's family over earlier for lunch, and the house was finally quiet. The kids were in their pajamas, hyped up on sugar and the electric excitement that only Christmas Eve can bring, watching some cartoon special in the living room. My wife was in the kitchen, wrapping a last-minute gift she'd hidden a little too well. The whole house smelled like pine needles and sugar cookies. It was perfect. It was safe. I was out of cigarettes, a bad habit I know, but it was my one vice that night. I'd been trying to quit, but with all the family chaos, I'd caved and bought a pack earlier in the week. It was in my car, out in the driveway. I told my wife I was just going to grab something real quick. She gave me that look, the one that says, "I know exactly what you're doing." But she just smiled and said, "Hurry back, it's almost time for the kids to put out the cookies for Santa." I remember pulling my boots on over my socks, not even bothering to tie them. I threw on my heavy winter coat over my t-shirt. It was cold outside, the kind of cold that feels sharp and clean in your lungs. The sky was totally black, no moon that I could see, but the cold made the stars look incredibly bright and sharp, like someone had sprinkled glitter on black velvet. Our porch light was on, casting a weak yellow circle on the front steps and the first few feet of the driveway. Beyond that, it was just deep darkness. My car was parked maybe 30 feet from the front door, facing the house. It's an old sedan, nothing special. I crunched across the frozen gravel, my breath pluming out in front of me in thick, white clouds. The air was so still and quiet. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. You could hear a pin drop out there. I hit the button on my key fob and the car's interior light clicked on, a little beacon in the dark. I opened the driver's side door and the dome light felt blinding after the darkness. I leaned in, rummaging in the center console where I knew I'd left the pack. My fingers closed around the cardboard and I pulled it out. I was halfway back out of the car when I heard it. It wasn't a subtle sound, it was a crunch. A heavy, deliberate crunch of frozen earth, like someone had dropped a sack of concrete onto the ground. It came from the direction of the side yard, the part that leads to the back of the house where the big old oak trees are. I froze, bent over awkwardly with my top half still in the car. My first thought, stupidly, was a deer. We get them sometimes, but this was different. A deer is light, skittish. Its steps are quick. This was a thud, a single, weighty footstep. I slowly straightened up, my heart starting to thump a little harder against my ribs. I peered into the darkness past the edge of the porch light's glow. At first I couldn't see anything, just the black shapes of the bushes against the even blacker background of the trees. I held my breath, listening. The silence felt thick now, heavy, oppressive. Then I saw movement. It was a shape, detaching itself from the deeper shadows near the tree line. It was big. That's the first thing my brain registered. Not fat, but tall and solid. It was walking, moving from my left to my right, heading towards the cluster of oaks behind our property. It was maybe 15, 20 feet away from me, no farther. The porch light didn't reach it, but there was just enough ambient light from the stars, or maybe a distant security light from a neighbor's house a mile down the road, to define its silhouette against the slightly less dark background of the yard. It was walking on two legs. That's what made my stomach drop. It was upright, like a man, but it wasn't a man. It was covered in hair. Not fur like a bear, but dark, shaggy hair. It was impossibly broad across the shoulders, and its arms were too long. They hung down by its sides, and its hands, if that's what they were, swung low, past its knees. Its head was set directly on those massive shoulders, no real neck to speak of, and it was blocky, like a gorilla's. I am 6 feet tall. I played football in high school. I'm not a small guy. This thing, it made me feel like a child. It had to be at least 2, maybe 3 feet taller than me. 8, 9 feet tall, easy. Its legs were thick, like tree trunks, and with every step it took I heard that same solid, crushing crunch as its weight compacted the frozen ground. The terror wasn't from some sudden jump scare. It was a slow, cold dread that started in my feet and crawled up my legs, into my gut, and finally seized my heart. It was the proximity. This thing was so close I could have thrown a rock and hit it. I could hear the rustle of its coat, hide, as it moved. I could smell it, a musky, damp, earthy smell, like wet dog and old leaves and raw soil. It was a smell that belonged deep in the woods, not in my suburban side yard on Christmas Eve. My body just locked up. Every muscle went rigid. My brain was screaming at me to run, to scream, to do something. But my body wouldn't listen. It was a primal animal fear. The kind that tells you if you move, if you make a sound, you're dead. I was just a statue, a frozen mannequin leaning against my car door, watching this thing walk calmly across my property. It never turned its head. It never looked at me. It just kept walking with this powerful, purposeful stride towards the trees. Its back was to me the whole time. I never saw its face, and I thank God for that every single day. Seeing its face might have broken something in me for good. The part of my brain that was still functioning, the part that wasn't completely swamped by sheer terror, was screaming one word over and over: Bigfoot. It was a stupid word, a joke from a TV show. But in that moment, it was the only word that fit. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a person in a costume. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. It took maybe 5, 6 steps to cross the open part of the yard and reach the tree line. Each step was an eternity. I watched its huge, dark form move between the trunks of the first oaks. It didn't slow down. It just melted into the shadows between the trees and was gone. The sound of its footsteps stopped. The silence that rushed back in was somehow louder and more terrifying than the footsteps had been. It was an empty silence, a waiting silence. That's when the spell broke. The fear that had frozen me turned into a different kind of fear. A frantic, desperate need to get inside, to get behind a locked door. I didn't run. Running felt like it would make too much noise, like it would draw attention. I moved backwards in a low crouch, my eyes glued to the spot where it had disappeared. My boots scuffed quietly on the gravel. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples. I fumbled behind me for the door handle to the garage. My fingers, numb with cold and fear, slipped off the metal twice before I finally got a grip and pulled it open. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut as quietly as I could. I didn't let it latch. I just eased it closed until the frame met the seal. I was in the dark garage. It was warmer in here, smelling of gasoline and lawnmower clippings. I stood there in the pitch black, my back pressed against the cold metal of the door, listening. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. I strained to hear anything from outside. A footstep, a branch snapping, anything, nothing. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 minutes, I turned and crept through the mudroom and into the kitchen. The light was blinding. The Christmas tree was sparkling in the next room. My wife looked up from her wrapping paper. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked, her voice cheerful. I looked down at my hand. I was still clutching the pack of cigarettes, now crushed and bent in my white-knuckled grip. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out as a dry croak. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, got 'em." I must have looked pale because she frowned. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. It felt like a crack in my face. Just cold, really cold out there. I went to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking so badly I sloshed water all over the counter. I drank it down in one go, the coldness doing nothing to settle the icy knot in my stomach. I could still smell that musky, earthy scent in my nostrils. I could still see the way it moved, that powerful, effortless stride. The rest of the night was a blur. I went through the motions. I helped the kids put out cookies and milk for Santa. I listened to them read, "'Twas the night before Christmas." I hugged them good night. But my mind was outside, in the dark, watching that thing walk into the trees. Every time the house settled, I jumped. Every time one of the dogs twitched in its sleep, my heart skipped a beat. My wife knew something was wrong, but she didn't press. She just gave me a concerned look every now and then. Later, lying in bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, all the little things from the past few months started clicking into place. Our dogs, two big German shepherds who are afraid of nothing, would sometimes go berserk in the middle of the night, barking and snarling at the back door at nothing we could see. We'd just chalked it up to raccoons or coyotes and the cornfields. Our property backs up to about 50 acres of corn. After the harvest, when the stalks are just brown stubble, you can see paths worn through them. Not deer paths. These were wider, like something much bigger had been moving through there regularly. I'd seen them when I was out walking the property line, but I'd just assumed it was the farmer's ATV tracks, even though they didn't look quite right. Lying there, it all made a horrible, terrifying sense. I didn't sleep that night, I just listened. I listened to the wind in the trees, and every time it gusted, I held my breath, waiting for it to mask the sound of a heavy, crunching footstep. The next morning, Christmas Day, I went outside. The sun was out, bright and cheerful. The world looked normal and safe. I walked over to the spot where I'd seen it. The ground was frozen solid, so there were no clear footprints. But there, in a patch of softer earth near the tree line, I saw one, a single massive impression. It was long, easily 18 inches and wide. It wasn't a detailed cast-worthy print. It was just a deep, vague depression in the dirt. But it was there. I didn't show anyone. I didn't tell my wife. What would I say? "Hey, honey, remember how I looked spooked last night? It's because I saw Bigfoot getting a head start on his Christmas Eve rounds." She'd have called a doctor, so I've kept it to myself. But I think about it every single day. I never go outside after dark alone anymore. I installed motion sensor lights all around the house. I look out the back window constantly, scanning the tree line. I saw something that doesn't exist. I saw something that walked out of a campfire story and across my frozen lawn on the one night of the year that's supposed to be about magic and peace. And the worst part, the part that still gives me chills, is that it never even looked at me. I was just there. An irrelevance. It was just passing through. And I can't help but wonder, if it was just passing through that night, where does it go the rest of the time? And is it still out there right now, just beyond the circle of my porch light, walking? Story 2. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in because I need to get this out. I've been sitting on this for a while now, and every time I think about it, my stomach knots up. I've read a bunch of stories on here from people who've had weird encounters, and I always thought, yeah, sure, that's wild. But now I get it. This happened to me about 2 months ago, and I still can't sleep right. I'm just a regular guy, I work in IT, I visit my mom sometimes. Nothing special. But what I saw that day, it's burned into my brain. I was visiting my mom in Eagle County, Colorado. She lives in this little house tucked away in the woods, kind of isolated but not too far from town. It was a Friday, I remember, because I'd taken the day off to drive up and spend the weekend with her. The weather was that typical Colorado mix. Cool, but not cold, with the sun starting to dip behind the mountains. It must have been around 5 o'clock, maybe a little after, because I'd just finished helping her with dinner cleanup. We'd had some lasagna, and I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing off plates before putting them in the dishwasher, The sink faces this big window that looks out into her backyard. It's not a huge yard, maybe 50 feet deep, but it backs right up to a thick line of pine trees. Beyond that, it's just more woods and hills. Real rugged stuff. I've always loved the view. It's peaceful, you know. You see squirrels, the occasional deer, sometimes a fox. That evening, everything was quiet. The light was fading into that soft golden hour glow, and the shadows were getting longer. I was just staring out, not really thinking about anything, just watching the trees sway a bit in the breeze. Then I noticed movement near the tree line. At first, I didn't pay much attention. I figured it was the neighbor's dog. They've got this big German shepherd that sometimes wanders over. But something felt off. The movement was heavier, I guess, slower. I leaned in a little, squinting, and that's when I saw it step out from between two pines. My brain took a second to catch up. It was upright, walking on two legs, and it was tall. Really tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least 7 or 8 feet high because it cleared the lower branches without ducking. It had a heavy build, like a football player, but bigger, with these long arms that swung as it moved, and it was covered in dense brown hair, not fur like a bear, but more like shaggy, matted hair that looked almost wet in the fading light. I froze. My hand was still on the faucet, and I just stood there watching. Part of me was trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear. But bears don't walk upright for long, and this thing was moving smoothly, like it was meant to be on two legs. And the arms, they were too long, almost gorilla-like. My heart started thumping in my chest, hard and fast, like it was trying to escape. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, and my breathing got shallow. Then it turned its head slightly, and that's when the terror really hit me. Its eyes caught the evening light, and they glowed. Not like an animal's eyes reflecting headlights. This was different. They were this unnatural reddish hue, bright and piercing, like two little embers in the shadows. It shouldn't have been possible without some kind of artificial light, but there was nothing out there. Just the dusk and the trees. The glow was steady, not flickering, and it seemed to lock onto me for a split second. I felt a jolt go through my whole body, like I'd been zapped. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I swear the hair on my arms stood up. In that moment, I knew this wasn't a bear or a deer or anything I'd ever seen. This was something else, something people talk about in whispers. Bigfoot. The word popped into my head, and it felt ridiculous, but there was no denying what I was seeing. It was real, and it was right there in my mum's backyard. It didn't linger. It just kept moving, crossing the yard in a straight path. Its steps were deliberate, not rushed, like it had somewhere to be. The ground was soft from recent rain, but it didn't leave any deep impressions. Just light, almost graceful footprints that I could barely make out from the window. It moved through the grass and into another cluster of trees on the far side of the yard. And then it was gone, just like that, vanished into the shadows. I stood there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. My body was rigid, my fingers gripping the edge of the sink so hard, my knuckles turned white. I could feel the cold sweat on my forehead, and my mouth was dry. I finally managed to snap out of it and stumbled back from the window, my legs feeling like jelly. I fumbled for my phone on the counter, my hands shaking so bad, I almost dropped it. I dialed my mum's number. She was in the living room watching TV. And when she answered, my voice came out all shaky and hoarse. "Mum, you need to come here, now." I didn't even try to sound calm. She must have heard the panic because she was in the kitchen in seconds. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes wide. I pointed out the window, my hand trembling. There was something out there, in the yard. She peered out, squinting. "What? I don't see anything." "Was it a deer?" I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "No, it was big, walking on two legs, and its eyes, they were red." She gave me this look, half concerned, half skeptical. "Are you sure? Maybe it was the light playing tricks, or that dog from next door." But I knew what I saw. I insisted we go outside and check. The whole time my heart was still racing, and I felt this dread building in my chest, like something bad was going to happen if we stepped out there. But I had to know. I had to see if there was any evidence. We went out the back door, and the air felt colder than before. The yard was quiet, too quiet. No birds chirping, no rustling in the trees, just silence. I led the way to where I'd seen it, my eyes scanning the ground. The grass was damp, and I could see where it had been pressed down in a few spots, but no clear tracks, nothing definitive. It was like it had barely touched the earth. We walked over to the tree line where it disappeared, and I peered into the woods, dark, thick, and impenetrable. No sounds, no movement, nothing. My mum patted my arm. "Honey, it's probably nothing. Maybe you were tired from the drive." But I wasn't tired. I was wide awake, and every sense was on high alert. I could still feel that electric shock from when our eyes met. We stayed out there for maybe 20 minutes, searching, but there was nothing. No broken branches, no hair caught on bark, no footprints deeper than a slight indentation. It was like it had never been there at all. We went back inside, and I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. The rest of the evening I was jumpy. Every little noise made me flinch. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see those red eyes staring back. My mom made tea, and we sat at the table, but I couldn't focus. I just kept replaying it in my head, the way it moved, the sheer size of it, those glowing eyes. It was so vivid, so real. Later that night, I lay in bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The window was open a crack, and I could hear the wind rustling the trees. Normally it's a soothing sound, but that night it felt ominous. I kept thinking about how close it had been, maybe 30, 40 feet from the house. What if it had come closer? What if it was still out there? I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red eyes. The next day, I went out again in the daylight, searching more thoroughly. Still nothing. No tracks, no signs. It was like it had evaporated. I even talked to the neighbors, casually, not mentioning what I saw. And they said their dog had been inside all evening. So it wasn't that. I've replayed that moment over and over in my mind. The casual observation turning into sheer terror, the way the light hit its eyes, that unnatural red glow that defies explanation. I've read up on Bigfoot sightings since then, and the eyeshine thing comes up sometimes, but hearing about it is one thing. Seeing it yourself is another. It's not just scary, it's humbling. Like you're seeing something that shouldn't exist, and it changes how you see the world. I didn't tell many people about this because who would believe me? But I had to share it here, where others might understand. That day in Eagle County stuck with me. I still visit my mum, but I avoid the kitchen sink at dusk. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. I'll never forget it, I just can't. Story 3. Okay, I'll try to write this, like I'm the person it happened to, posting online. Here goes. I don't even know why I'm typing this out. I've never posted anything like this before. I usually just read these kinds of stories and move on, maybe leave a comment if something really hits home. But this has been stuck in my head for weeks now, and I can't shake it. I need to get it out. Maybe someone here will believe me. Maybe someone else has seen something similar up here. I don't know. My name's not important. I'm a forestry technician. I work in the Prince Rupert district in British Columbia. It's my job. I've been doing it for about 8 years now. I love the woods. I've always loved them. I grew up around here. I know these forests. I know the sounds, the smells, when something's out of place. At least I thought I did. This happened on a Tuesday back in early October. The day had been totally normal, honestly. Just another day on the job. We were inspecting a spacing project in an old cut block that's basically checking on an area that's been logged before, seeing how the new trees are growing, figuring out if any more work needs to be done. My crew and I had been out there since 9 in the morning. It was a standard day, a bit chilly. the way it gets up here when autumn really starts to dig its heels in. The sky was that flat, solid grey that promises rain but never quite delivers. You know the type. The crew packed up around 3:30 in the afternoon. We have a system. The truck was parked miles away, down a network of old logging roads, and our pickup was scheduled for a beach about a 45-minute walk from the work site. The guys took the quad, loaded up the gear. I told them I'd walk. I do it all the time. I like the quiet at the end of the day. It helps me decompress, just me in the woods. I've never been scared, not once. I carry bear mace, I know what to do. I'm not some city kid who gets spooked by shadows. So they left, the sound of the quad engine fading away down the road, and then it was just silence. That deep, thick silence you only get in a place like that. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my own boots on the gravel road. The road I was on was an old one, mostly grown over with fireweed and young alders. It was wide enough for a truck, but just barely, with walls of dense forest on either side, tall hemlock and cedar, lots of undergrowth. It was that time of day where the light starts to get long and lazy, casting these deep, long shadows across the road. Everything was tinged with that golden hour glow, but it felt different that day. It felt heavy. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes, just lost in my own thoughts, thinking about the data we'd collected, what I was going to make for dinner, stupid stuff. And then I got this feeling. It's hard to describe, but I know you guys might understand it. It was a prickle on the back of my neck. A sudden, intense certainty that I wasn't alone. Not in a general, there's wildlife around way. I'm used to that. You feel the presence of a deer or a bear, and it's a specific kind of energy. This was different. This was a feeling of being watched, studied. It was so strong, it felt like a physical pressure between my shoulder blades. I stopped walking, just froze right there in the middle of the road. My heart, which had been chugging along normally, suddenly kicked into a higher gear. Thump, thump, thump against my ribs. I remember thinking, this is stupid, you're being stupid, it's a squirrel, it's a bird. But my body wasn't listening to my brain. Every instinct was screaming at me. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to calm down. The air smelled like damp earth and decaying leaves. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I forced myself to turn my head, to look back the way I'd come. The road behind me was empty, just a tunnel of shadows and light. I scanned the tree line, my eyes moving from tree to tree, looking for a shape, a movement, anything that didn't belong. Nothing. I was about to turn back around to laugh at myself and keep walking, when my eyes caught something to the right of the road, maybe 60, 70 feet back, just inside the tree line. There was a space between two big cedar trees, and in that space, something was standing. It was tall, so damn tall, and it was dark. Not black, but a deep, rich, dark brown like wet bark. It was covered in hair or fur, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear's. It looked matted, thick, and it was just standing there, perfectly still, facing me. My brain short-circuited. It tried to file it under bear. It's always a bear, right? But it wasn't. The proportions were all wrong. Its legs were too long, its arms were way too long, hanging down past its knees. Its shoulders were massive, hunched, and it was standing on two legs, but not upright like a person. It was in a slight crouch, like its knees were permanently bent. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, just a dark shape where a face should be, but I could feel it looking at me. That feeling of being watched intensified until it was almost suffocating. We stood like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, me, frozen in the middle of the road, and this thing just staring at me from the shadows. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't amble. It took 2 steps, just 2, but they were the fastest, most powerful strides I have ever seen in my life. It didn't seem to move its legs like an animal. It was more like a glide, but with immense, explosive power. Its body stayed low to the ground, those long arms swinging, and it covered the distance from where it was standing to behind a massive moss-covered boulder in a literal blink of an eye. The movement was silent, absolutely silent. No crunch of twigs, no rustle of leaves, nothing. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone behind this big rock. My heart just dropped into my stomach. A cold sweat broke out all over my body, instantly soaking the back of my shirt under my jacket. My hands started to tremble. This wasn't a bear. A bear, even a fast one, moves with a certain weight, a certain sound. This was something else. It was fluid and unnaturally quick. That crouched walk, the way it used its arms. It was alien. It was wrong. My training kicked in, the part that wasn't completely paralyzed with fear. My right hand, which was shaking so bad I could barely control it, went to the canister of bear spray on my hip. I fumbled with the safety clip, my fingers numb and clumsy. I finally got it off, my thumb resting on the trigger. The bright red canister felt pitifully small in my hand. I started walking again, but my pace was completely different now. Before, it was a leisurely stroll. Now, it was a forced, quick march. I didn't run. Everything I've ever been taught about predators screamed at me not to run. Running triggers a chase response. But every fiber of my being was screaming to run, to just sprint as fast as I could down that damn road. I kept my eyes locked on the area where it had disappeared. The boulder, the trees around it. My head was on a swivel, my neck aching with the tension. I'd walk forward 10 paces, then quickly glance over my shoulder, expecting to see it standing in the road behind me, or worse, right behind me. I'd look to the sides, into the dark spaces between the trees, my eyes straining to see any movement, any patch of dark brown that shouldn't be there. The woods had gone completely dead silent. Before, there was at least the ambient hum of life. Now, there was nothing. It was like someone had thrown a sound-dampening blanket over everything. The only sound was the frantic rustle of my jacket, my own ragged breathing, and the frantic thumping of my heart. I could feel the cold air burning in my lungs. Every shadow was a threat. Every stump looked like a crouching figure. A branch would snap somewhere deep in the woods and I'd jump, my whole body flinching, my grip tightening on the bear spray. I held it out in front of me, pointed down but ready. It was my only lifeline. The walk to the beach felt like it took a year. Every step was a conscious effort. My muscles were so tight, they felt like they might snap. I was constantly calculating the distance in my head. Okay, the big bend in the road is up ahead, that's about halfway. Once I pass the creek, I'm almost there. I've never been so aware of every landmark. I kept expecting something to happen. For it to step out onto the road in front of me, for a rock to come flying out of the woods, for that terrible, silent movement to happen again, right next to me. But nothing did. The woods remained still and silent. It was almost worse, the not knowing. The feeling that it was still there, just out of sight, keeping pace with me, watching. When I finally saw the break in the trees ahead, the glimpse of grey water, I almost cried with relief. I picked up my pace, my walk turning into a fast, clumsy jog. I burst out of the tree line onto the rocky beach. The float plane was there, bobbing gently in the water. Its yellow hull, the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The pilot was standing on the pontoon, smoking a cigarette. He saw me and waved. I must have looked a mess, pale, wide-eyed, breathing hard. I forced myself to slow down, to try and look normal. I couldn't get my hands to stop shaking. I shoved the bear spray back into its holster, my fingers fumbling with the clip. "Everything all right?" the pilot asked as I waded into the cold water to get to the plane. "Yeah," I said, and my voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, fine. Just thought I saw a bear." He nodded, not thinking much of it. "Happens. Hop in." I climbed into the plane, my body feeling heavy and weak. As we took off, climbing up over the forest, I stared down at the canopy. It looked so peaceful from up there, just an endless green blanket. But down there in the shadows, I knew what was there, or what had been there. I was safe. The engine was loud, the cabin was warm, but I couldn't stop shaking. I felt cold right down to my bones. The terror of that moment, spotting it the way it moved, was burned into my mind. It wasn't the fear of being attacked. It was the fear of seeing something that shouldn't exist, something that moved in a way that broke all the rules of the forest I thought I knew. I didn't say anything else to the pilot. What would I have said? I think I saw Bigfoot. He'd have thought I was crazy. I've been back in the woods since then. It's my job. But it's different now. I'm always on edge. I jump at every little sound. I don't stay out late alone anymore. And I never, ever walk that particular road by myself. I keep going over it in my head. The height, the color, the way its knees were bent, the sheer, terrifying speed of those 2 strides. It wasn't a bear. I've spent my whole life around bears. I know what they look like, how they move. This was different. I saw something in the woods that day. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. All I know is that it was real. It saw me. And the way it moved is something I will never, ever forget. It's been weeks, and I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart hammering, seeing that dark shape glide behind that rock. I don't think that feeling is ever going to go away. Story 4. It was July of 1993. I was 22 years old, and I thought I was invincible. My girlfriend at the time, she was the same age, and we were both just stupid kids who thought a weekend camping trip sounded like a good idea. We decided on the Santee River in Berkeley County, South Carolina. I'd been there once before with my dad years ago, and I remembered it as a quiet, peaceful spot. I was wrong. So damn wrong. The day started normal. Hot, sticky South Carolina summer hot, the kind where the air feels like a wet blanket and the mosquitoes are already forming committees to vote on the best parts of you to eat. We got there in my old Ford pickup truck, this beat-up red thing that was more rust than metal, but it was reliable. We bounced down this dirt track that was barely a road, following the curve of the river until we found a spot that looked good. It was near a cliff, not a huge one, maybe 40 feet high, but it gave the place a feeling of being closed in, sheltered. The riverbank was wide and sandy there, and the water was dark and slow-moving. It seemed perfect. We set up the tent, one of those cheap dome things from Kmart. I remember struggling with one of the flexible poles, trying to get it to snap into the grommet, sweating and cursing under my breath. She was unpacking the cooler, setting out the hot dogs and the beer. Everything was normal. The sun was starting to go down, painting the sky in oranges and purples, and the heat was finally letting up a little. We got a small fire going, just a little circle of stones with some twigs and branches burning. It was that peaceful time of day. The calm before everything went to hell. That's when we heard the first noise. It wasn't an animal noise, at least not any animal I'd ever heard. It was a splash, but not a fish jumping or a turtle plopping in. It was a heavy, solid thwump, like someone was heaving bricks into the water, one after another. Thwump, thwump. It was coming from upriver, around a bend, so we couldn't see what was causing it. We just looked at each other. My girlfriend's face had this little confused smile, like she was waiting for me to explain it. I just shrugged. Beavers, I said, but it didn't sound right, even to me. Beavers slap their tails. They don't make deep, concussive impacts like that. We tried to ignore it, to just focus on the fire and the idea of cooking dinner, but the sounds kept coming. They were rhythmic, deliberate. Then we saw the deer. A whole group of them, 5 or 6, came crashing out of the woods on the opposite bank. They weren't running along the shore. They were panicked, scrambling, and they just launched themselves into the river. I've seen deer swim before, but this was different. This was pure, blind terror. They were churning through the water, their eyes wide and white, heading for our side. One of them, A smaller one seemed to struggle, its head dipping under the dark water before it popped back up and kept going. They scrambled up the bank maybe 50 yards from us and vanished into the trees without a backward glance. The splashing sounds from upriver stopped. The silence that fell then was heavier than the noise had been. It was a thick, waiting silence. The forest had gone completely quiet. No crickets, no frogs, no birds, nothing. You don't realize how much noise a forest makes until it all just stops. It's like someone flipped a switch. My girlfriend moved closer to me on the log we were using as a bench. I could feel her trembling. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. My heart was starting to thump hard against my ribs, a dull, scared rhythm. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, just staring into the growing darkness across the river, not saying a word. The fire crackled, and it was the only sound in the whole world. That's when we heard the new sound, from the top of the cliff right behind our camp. It was a sound I can still hear perfectly in my head, even now. It was the sound of something very, very big starting to climb down. It wasn't a graceful sound, it was a sound of weight and power. The crunch of dirt and rock giving way, the snap of branches, not little twigs, but thick, wrist-thick branches, snapping like dry kindling. Crack, crunch, scrape. It was moving down the cliff face, methodically, purposefully. I remember the feeling in my gut, a cold, sinking feeling that started in my stomach and spread out to my fingers and toes, making them feel numb. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't climb down sheer rock faces like that, they just don't. I looked at my girlfriend and her eyes were huge, locked on mine. All the color had drained from her face. We didn't need to speak. We both knew. We had to go. Now. The next few minutes were a blur of pure, unthinking panic. I kicked dirt onto the fire, not even caring if it was out, just wanting to kill the light. We abandoned everything. The tent, the sleeping bags, the cooler, all of it, it was just stuff. The only thing that mattered was the truck. The keys were in my pocket, thank God. I grabbed her hand and we started to run for the truck, which was parked about 30 yards away, up the slight incline from the riverbank. We were halfway there when the sound from the cliff stopped. It didn't fade away. It just stopped. The thing, whatever it was, had reached the bottom. It was in the camp with us. I risked a look back. The fire was just a pile of glowing embers now, casting a weak, hellish red light. I couldn't see anything specific, just deep, moving shadows at the base of the cliff, but I could smell it. A smell hit me that made my stomach clench. It was a mix of things, a wet dog smell, but 1,000 times stronger, mixed with the coppery tang of old blood and something else, something rotten, like a bog or a stagnant pond. It was the smell of something dead and something alive all rolled into one, and it was awful. We scrambled into the truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a roar that sounded obscenely loud in the silence. I slammed it into reverse, spinning the wheels in the sand, and backed up wildly, not caring about the path, just wanting to put distance between us and that smell, that presence. I got us turned around, the headlights cutting 2 shaky beams through the dark woods, illuminating the narrow track ahead. I shoved the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The truck lurched forward. We were maybe going 15, 20 miles an hour, bouncing over ruts, branches scraping the sides. I was just focused on that tunnel of light, on getting out. And then it stepped out of the trees. It didn't run out, it just stepped. One moment the path was clear, the next it was there, standing directly in the middle of the track, maybe 20 feet in front of the truck's grill. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidded on the loose dirt and we came to a jerking halt, the engine stalling out from the shock. The headlights were pointing right at it, illuminating it in this stark, terrible clarity. It was tall. My brain tried to process it, to find a reference point. It was taller than the hood of my truck. I drive an F-150. This thing had to be 9 feet tall, easy. It was covered in hair, but not fur. It was long, shaggy, matted hair, dark brown and black, and it was soaking wet, dripping water onto the dirt road. It looked like it had just walked out of the river. But its eyes. God, its eyes. They caught the headlights and they glowed. Not a reflection, not like a deer's eyes. They glowed a deep, solid, hateful red, like two burning coals set deep in its face. It just stood there, one foot in front of the other, like it had been frozen mid-stride. Its legs were massive, like tree trunks, and I could see the sheer power in its stance. That one step it had taken to block our path must have covered a distance of 3 feet. It wasn't a lunge, it was just its normal, casual stride. It turned its head and looked directly at us through the windshield. The red eyes pinned me to my seat. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My lungs just locked up. I could feel a cold sweat break out all over my body, a clammy, sick feeling. My girlfriend made a sound next to me, a tiny, choked whimper that was more air than voice. She had her hands pressed over her mouth, her knuckles white. The creature's face was wrong. It wasn't a bear's face. It wasn't an ape's face. It was something in between, but more primitive, more brutal. The brow was heavy, the nose was flat, and its mouth was just a dark line. It was completely still. It didn't roar. It didn't beat its chest. It just stared with those hellish red eyes, and its silence was 1,000 times more terrifying than any sound could have been. I don't know how long we sat there. It could have been 5 seconds. It could have been a minute. Time just stopped. The whole world had shrunk down to the inside of that truck cab, and the thing standing outside it. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. I could smell the faint metallic scent of my own fear. I remember thinking very clearly, this is it, this is how I die. I was absolutely certain of it. Then it moved. It didn't turn around. It just took another one of those impossibly long, casual strides, moving from the center of the road to the tree line on the passenger side. It moved with an unnerving, fluid grace that belied its immense size. It didn't look back. It just stepped into the wall of dark pine trees and was gone. 1 second it was there, illuminated in the headlights, and the next there was nothing but shadows and the lingering, gut-churning smell of wet hair and decay. The silence rushed back in, even heavier than before. It took me another few seconds to remember how to breathe. I sucked in a ragged gasp of air. My girlfriend was crying silently beside me, tears streaming down her face. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat, and turned the ignition. The engine coughed and started. I didn't wait. I didn't look around. I just put my foot down and drove, bouncing and swerving down that dirt track as fast as I dared, expecting at any moment for those red eyes to appear in the trees beside us, or for that massive, wet shape to step out in front of us again. We didn't stop until we hit the main paved road miles away. We pulled over at a gas station that was still open, its fluorescent lights a shocking, beautiful sight. We just sat in the truck for a long time, not speaking, both of us shaking. We never went back for our gear. We never talked about it much after that. We broke up a few months later, and I think that night was a big part of the reason why. It was a shared trauma that we couldn't process, but the story doesn't quite end there. The next day, in the cold, rational light of a Sunday morning, a buddy of mine who was a deputy sheriff agreed to go back out there with me. I couldn't go alone. I just couldn't. We took his cruiser. We found the campsite exactly as we'd left it. The tent was still standing. The cooler was still there. But everything felt wrong. The air was still and cold, and there in the soft mud of the road, right where the thing had stood in front of my truck, was a single footprint. It was huge, longer than my forearm, and wide. It was a barefoot print with 5 distinct toes, but it wasn't human. It was just wrong. The shape was off. The proportions were alien. And pressed deep into the mud next to it was the source of the dead animal smell we'd noticed the night before. It was a dead raccoon. It wasn't eaten. It looked like it had been torn apart. Not by teeth, but by pure force. Its body was just ripped open. We didn't stick around. My friend, the deputy, he just looked at the print, looked at me and said, "Let's get the hell out of here." And we did. I never reported it officially. What would I say? I still don't know what it was. I've read the stories, I've heard the names, but giving it a name doesn't make it any less real, and it doesn't make the memory of those red eyes staring into my soul any less terrifying. It was just there, and then it was gone, and I've never been the same since. Story 5. All right, I've never posted anything like this before, and honestly, I'm still not sure I should be doing this. But it's been stuck in my head for weeks now, and I feel like I need to get it out somewhere, to people who might actually get it. My girlfriend thinks I'm crazy for even considering talking about it online, but she saw it too, so she knows I'm not making it up. We just don't talk about it much anymore. It's like this weird, heavy secret between us now. So, this happened about 3 weeks ago, on a Friday night, or I guess it was technically very early Saturday morning. We'd been at the Walmart in Spruce Pine. It's the only one around for miles, and sometimes we do our big grocery run late because it's empty, and you don't have to deal with the crowds. We were heading back home, which is a good 25-minute drive down this winding 2-lane highway that cuts through the mountains. It was probably around 2 in the morning, the kind of late where you're past tired and into that weird, floaty state of just being awake. The car was packed with bags. I remember the smell of the plastic bags and the cold air coming through the vents. My girlfriend was in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, the blue light washing out her face. The radio was on low, some classic rock station playing a song I can't even remember now. Everything was just normal, boring even. The kind of drive you've done 100 times. We weren't speeding or anything. The road is twisty and known for deer, so I was taking it easy, doing maybe 35 miles an hour. The headlights were cutting a tunnel through the absolute blackness. Out there, away from the town lights, the night is a solid thing. It's not just dark, it's a thick, deep black that feels like it's pressing against the windows. We came around a gentle left-hand curve, and the headlights swept across the road ahead. That's when I saw it. About 150 feet in front of us, something was crossing the road. My first thought, my brain's automatic logical thought was, bear. We get black bears around here, you see them sometimes, but this was different. It was dark, really dark, and covered in what looked like shaggy hair, but it was walking upright, on 2 legs. I actually remember my foot lifting off the gas a little, just a reflex. "Whoa," I said, or something like that. My girlfriend looked up from her phone. "What is it?" We were getting closer, the headlights locking onto it. It wasn't just walking across the road. It was moving from the left shoulder to the right, but it was doing it sideways, like it was crab walking but fully upright, and its head was turned. It was looking right at us. That's the part that really gets me, even now. It was looking right at the car, into the headlights. I could see the shape of its head, kind of conical, no neck to speak of, just these massive shoulders. The light caught its eyes for a split second. Not a glow, but a wet shine, like an animal's eyes. It wasn't a bear. A bear might stand up for a second, but it's clumsy. It wobbles. This thing was balanced, solid. Its legs moved with a purpose, a kind of eerie grace that was completely wrong. It was tall, too, way taller than a man. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet. It was huge through the chest and shoulders, just a wall of muscle and dark brown, almost black hair. It took these long, deliberate strides, but because it was moving sideways, it felt even more unnatural. It wasn't running. It wasn't startled. It was just crossing and watching us the whole time. My brain was screaming, trying to find a box to put this in, a guy in a fursuit at 2 in the morning in the middle of nowhere. No. A bear? No, no. 1,000 times no. This was bipedal, fully upright, with a gait that was nothing like a human's, but wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen either. It was powerful. You could see the power in its thighs and back as it moved. The whole crossing probably only took a few seconds, but it felt like it happened in slow motion. I could see individual details as the light hit it. The way the hair on its arms was longer and shaggier. The way its arms swung, not like a human's, but with a slight bend. The hands hanging low, past its knees. I couldn't make out fingers or anything. It was all just a dark mass. But the proportions were all wrong for a primate. At least any primate that's supposed to be in North Carolina. Then it reached the right-hand edge of the road. It didn't break its stride, it just stepped off the asphalt, down into the tall grass of the ditch, and then it was gone, just vanished. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible silhouette in the headlights, and the next, the spot where it had been, was just empty darkness. I had slowed the car down to a crawl without even realizing it. We were probably doing 10 miles an hour by the time we reached the spot where it had crossed. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the quiet car. The radio was still playing that stupid, cheerful rock song. "What the hell was that?" my girlfriend whispered. Her voice was thin and shaky. I didn't answer. I pulled the car over onto the narrow right shoulder, right where the thing had stepped off the road. The tires crunched on the gravel. I put the car in park, my hand trembling on the gear shift. We both just stared out the passenger window into the blackness of the field beyond the ditch. I rolled my window down. The cold night air rushed in, smelling of damp earth and pine. The sound of crickets and frogs was deafening after the quiet of the car. We listened. We stared. Nothing. No sound of something big moving through the underbrush. No cracking twigs. No grunt. Nothing. It was just a wall of darkness and the chorus of insects completely undisturbed. "It can't have just disappeared," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. I fumbled for the high beams, clicking them on. The brighter light pushed further into the field, illuminating a patch of tall, swaying grass and a line of trees maybe 50 yards back. Nothing. No movement. No hulking shape hiding behind a tree. It was just gone, like it had been swallowed by the earth. We sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring, not saying a word. The initial shock was starting to settle into a deep, cold dread that was seeping into my bones. My skin was crawling. I kept expecting to see those eyes appear in the darkness, just floating there, watching us. I felt exposed. The interior light of the car felt like a beacon, and I had this overwhelming primal urge to get the hell out of there. "We should go," my girlfriend said, her voice tight with fear. She was gripping the door handle, her knuckles white. I didn't need to be told twice. I rolled up the window, my movements jerky, and put the car back in drive. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The red glow of my taillights receded, showing nothing but an empty road behind us. For the first mile or so, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the tires on the pavement. I had my hands clenched on the steering wheel, my shoulders up around my ears. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see it running after the car, but there was nothing. Finally, I had to say it. I had to hear the words out loud. "That wasn't a bear," I said. My girlfriend let out a shaky breath. "I know. It was walking on 2 legs the whole time. I saw it. And it was looking at us, right at us." She just nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. We went through the list, the way you do when your brain is trying to reject something impossible. A person in a costume. In the middle of the night, miles from anywhere, with that kind of size and that kind of gait. No, a sick deer, a moose. We don't have moose here, and nothing on God's green earth walks like that. An ape? From where? The zoo. It was absurd. There was only one thing it could be. We both knew it. We'd grown up hearing the stories, the local legends. You laugh about them, you watch the silly TV shows. It's a joke. It's not something you ever think is real. But we had just seen it. We had seen a Sasquatch. Saying it in my head felt crazy. Saying it out loud felt even crazier. But the alternative, that we had both simultaneously hallucinated the same exact detailed, terrifying thing, felt even less likely. The rest of the drive home was a blur. I drove faster than I should have, my eyes constantly scanning the woods on either side of the road. Every shadow looked like a hunched form. Every deer marker on the side of the road made my heart jump. The normal comfort of getting closer to home was gone, replaced by a feeling that the world had just become a much bigger, much stranger, and much more terrifying place. We got home, unloaded the groceries in a frantic, silent rush, and locked the door behind us. We didn't talk about it again that night. We just went to bed, but neither of us slept. I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, seeing it over and over again in my mind. The way it moved, that sideways walk, the way it stared right through the windshield, right into me. The thing that haunts me the most, the detail I can't shake, isn't just its size or its hair. It was the way it moved. It wasn't clumsy or animalistic in a way I recognized. It was efficient, purposeful. It knew exactly what it was doing. It wasn't scared of the car. It wasn't scared of us. It was just crossing the road, and we happened to be there, and it made sure we saw it. I'm convinced of that. It made sure we saw it, and it made sure we knew that we were the ones being observed. I've driven that stretch of road a couple of times since then, in the daylight. I even pulled over at the same spot. There's nothing there. Just a ditch, a field, and the woods beyond. It looks completely ordinary, but I can't look at it without feeling that cold knot tighten in my stomach. I know what we saw. I know it was real, and I know that somewhere out there in those deep, dark woods, it's still there, and I have no idea what that means or what it wanted, and I don't think I ever will. Story 6. That night, it was clear and cool, the kind of autumn evening where the air feels crisp and the sky is so full of stars, you can almost forget you're in the middle of nowhere. I was stationed on this stretch of highway that cuts through dense forest, miles from the nearest town. My spot was on a grassy edge, with woods looming behind me and a tall granite wall to my left, like a natural barrier. I'd parked my cruiser there, engine off, and set up my radar gun on the hood. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in your bones after years of night shifts. I liked the isolation most nights. It gave me time to think, to just be alone with the hum of the road. I'd been there a couple of hours already, pulling over a few speeders here and there. Nothing major, just folks pushing 10 or 15 over the limit. I'd write the tickets, give them the usual spiel about safety, and send them on their way. After the last one, I decided to take a break. I stepped out of the car, stretched my legs, and stood there in the dark, just breathing in the cool air. The moon was out, but it was only a sliver, so the light was patchy, casting long shadows from the trees. I remember feeling the grass under my boots, damp from the evening dew, and hearing the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was peaceful, or at least it was, until everything changed. I was just standing there, maybe 5-10 minutes into my break, when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Down the road, near the shoulder, something was moving. At first I thought it was a person, maybe a hitchhiker or someone who'd broken down. But as it got closer, under that weak moonlight, I realized how wrong I was. This thing was huge, a dark mass shuffling slowly along the edge of the highway. My heart started thumping a little faster, not out of fear yet, but curiosity. Cops are trained to assess situations quickly, and my first thought was that it might be a bear or something, but bears don't walk like that. This was upright, moving with a purpose, but its size was all wrong. It was massive, way bigger than any man I'd ever seen. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the darkness made it hard. Then, as it drew nearer, maybe 50 yards away, I could see it more clearly. It was covered in dark, matted hair, like it had been rolling in mud or something. Its shoulders were enormous, bulging with muscle, and its head was set low, almost like it was hunched over. The way it moved was eerie. Slow, deliberate steps, but each one covered a lot of ground. I felt a chill run down my spine, the kind you get when your instincts scream that something isn't right. I've been in fights, faced down armed suspects, but this was different. This was primal fear, the kind that sits in your gut and tells you to run. Without thinking, I reached for my flashlight on my belt. My hands were a little shaky, but I managed to click it on and point it toward the figure. The beam cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw the eyes. 2 red eyes, glowing back at me before the light even fully hit it. They weren't reflecting light like an animal's eyes sometimes do. They were just glowing like embers in the dark. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a second, everything stopped. The sounds of the night, the feel of the air. It all just vanished. All I could see were those red eyes locked on me. Then it let out a growl. Not a sound I'd ever heard before. It was deep, guttural, like rocks grinding together, and it echoed off the granite wall to my left, amplifying it until it felt like the ground was vibrating. The sound hit me in the chest, and I swear I felt it in my teeth. My whole body went cold, and I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. The creature didn't wait. It took a few long strides, each one covering what seemed like 5 feet or more, and crossed the highway in seconds. The muscles under its hair rippled with each movement, powerful and fluid, like it was built for raw strength. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to, and before I could even process what was happening, it vanished into the trees on the other side of the road. But it left something behind, a smell. Oh God, the smell. It hit me like a physical blow, this unbearable musky stench of decay and wet fur. It was thick, clinging to the air, and I could taste it in the back of my throat. I've been to crime scenes with decomp, but this was worse, like something had died and been left to rot in the damp. I stumbled back, my legs feeling weak, and leaned against my cruiser for support. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I just stood there, breathing heavy, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The red eyes, the growl, the sheer size of it. None of it fit into anything I knew. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a minute or two, but eventually I forced myself to move. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. My mind was racing. Was it a bear? No, bears don't have red eyes or walk like that. A person in a costume? That thought seemed ridiculous even then. The power in its movement was too real, too animal. I radioed in, my voice shaky, and reported a large animal on the highway, but I didn't go into details. I just said it was a potential hazard and that I was going to secure the area. I didn't want to sound crazy. The rest of the shift was a blur. I drove up and down that stretch of road a few times, but there was nothing, no sign of it. Just the usual darkness and silence. Every shadow made me jump, and that smell lingered in the air for what felt like hours. When my shift ended, I went home. But I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over in my head. The next day, I went back. I had to. I parked in the same spot, got out, and started poking around. The ground was soft from recent rain, and that's when I found them. Footprints, huge ones, about 20 inches long, and they were spaced about 5 feet apart. I measured them with my own feet, and yeah, they were that big. The impressions were deep, like whatever made them was heavy, and the toes were distinct, not like any animal track I'd ever seen. Nearby, there was broken vegetation, branches snapped off like something big had pushed through. And that same musky smell was still there, faint but unmistakable. I took photos with my phone, but when I showed them to the guys back at the station, they just laughed. One of them said I'd been watching too many horror movies. Another joked that it was probably a big dog or a bear on stilts. I tried to explain, but the more I talked, the crazier I sounded. So I shut up. I stopped bringing it up after that. But the terror of that moment never left me. The red eyes, the growl that echoed, the way it moved with a power beyond anything human, it stuck with me. A few months later, I put in my papers and retired. I couldn't handle the jokes, and honestly, I didn't want to be out on that highway again at night. To this day, I don't know what it was. I've read stories online, heard about Bigfoot and stuff, but I never believed in any of that. Now I'm not so sure. All I know is that on that clear night, I saw something that shouldn't exist, and it changed me. I still get chills thinking about it, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can almost smell that stench again. I guess some things you just can't explain, no matter how hard you try. Story 7. All right, I'm just going to type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been sitting on this for years now, and I guess I just need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has felt this, seen this. I don't know. I just know I can't shake it. My name's Clayton. Back in June of 2016, I drove up to this lake in western Minnesota for my annual fishing trip. I've been going to this same spot for over 15 years. It's not on any fancy map, just a small secluded lake tucked away in the woods, the kind of place you only find if someone shows you. I always go up a day early before my buddies arrive. I like the solitude, the quiet, or I used to. That year I got there on a Thursday. The air had a real bite to it. The temperature was down in the low 40s, which is cold for June. The sky was that flat grey color that makes everything feel still and heavy. I remember thinking it was perfect fishing weather. The walleye would be active. I parked my truck at the usual pull-off, the one that's more of a suggestion of a road than an actual road, and hauled my gear down to the campsite. It's a clear spot right near the water, with a good fire pit and some old logs to sit on. The walk from the truck to the camp is about 400 feet, through a mix of pine and poplar trees. I started setting up my tent, the same old two-man dome I've had forever, and that's when it started. This feeling. It's hard to describe, but it was this intense, crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. Not just glanced at, but studied. I've spent my whole life in the woods. I know the feeling of a deer watching you, or even a bear. This was different. It was heavier, more intelligent. I brushed it off at first, told myself I was just tired from the drive, that the cold was getting to me. But I kept finding myself stopping, my hands freezing halfway through pounding a tent stake, and I just listened. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No squirrels chattering, no birds. Just the wind moving through the high pine branches, a sound like a long, slow sigh. Every few minutes I'd turn around and scan the tree line. I saw nothing, just shadows and trees, but the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. Once the tent was up, I got my rod and decided to head to the lake to get some fishing in before dark. The path from camp to the water's edge is maybe 50 feet. I walked it, and with every step, I felt like there were eyes burning into my back. I actually caught myself walking sideways like a crab, trying to keep my eyes on the woods behind me and the path in front of me at the same time. It was ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. My heart was thumping a dull, steady rhythm in my chest, the kind you feel in your throat. I fished for a couple of hours. The action was good, I'll give it that. I caught a few decent walleye, enough for a good meal. But the whole time, I was sitting on that little folding stool, my back to the woods, and it felt like the worst decision I'd ever made. My shoulders were so tense they were up by my ears. Every little sound, a twig snapping, the water lapping, made me jump. I'd reel in a fish, my hands shaking from the cold and from something else, something deeper, and I'd quickly look over my shoulder expecting to see, I don't know what. I never saw anything. My fingers were getting numb, so I decided to head back to camp to warm up by the fire for a bit. I left my stringer of fish in the water, tied to a sturdy branch, like I always do. I started walking back up the path, this little worn-down trail of dirt and pine needles, and that's when I saw it. About halfway between the lake and my camp, right in the middle of the path, was a footprint. I stopped dead. It was a bare foot, a left foot, sunk into the soft, damp mud a good inch or two. It was huge. I'm a size 11, and this thing made my boot print look like a kid's. But the size wasn't the weirdest part. The shape was all wrong. The big toe. It was pointed off to the right, at an angle that didn't look natural. It wasn't splayed out like a human foot that's been walking barefoot its whole life. It was just wrong. Like the bone was put together differently. The arch was really high, and the ball of the foot was broad, really wide. My first thought was, who the hell is walking around out here barefoot? It was 40 degrees. The ground was cold and wet. Nobody does that. I looked around, my head on a swivel. The feeling of being watched now so intense it was like a physical pressure. The woods were still silent. I knelt down, my knees cracking, and I just stared at it. The mud was pushed down deep. Whatever made this print was heavy. Seriously heavy. I reached out a finger and touched the edge of the impression. The mud was cold and slick. This wasn't old. It was fresh. I stood up fast, my heart hammering against my ribs now. I didn't even bother trying to warm up. I went straight back to the lake, almost at a run, my breath puffing out in white clouds. I felt better with the water in front of me, even though I knew that was stupid. Whatever it was, could be anywhere. I fished for another hour, but my heart wasn't in it. I was just going through the motions, casting and reeling, my eyes constantly darting to the tree line. The sun started to dip below the trees, throwing long, distorted shadows across the water. The temperature dropped another few degrees. I decided to call it quits and get a fire going for real. On my way back to camp, I took a wider path, avoiding the spot where I'd seen the first print. And that's when I found the others. There were 2 more prints, a few feet apart, leading off the path and into the thicker undergrowth. One was the same as the first, that huge left foot with the messed up big toe. But right next to it, partly obscured by a fern, was another one. It was smaller. Not small, but noticeably smaller than the first, and it had the same weird inward-facing structure, the same unnatural angle to the toes. They were a pair. They were walking together. A cold dread, colder than the evening air, settled deep in my gut. This wasn't some lone weirdo. There were 2 of them, whatever they were. I felt a sudden, overpowering need for walls, for a locked door. I was out in the open with just a thin layer of nylon for shelter. It felt like nothing. I hurried back to camp and built a fire, piling on way more wood than I needed. The flames leapt up, crackling and spitting, and the light pushed back the darkness in a small, flickering circle. It should have been comforting, but it just made the woods beyond look even darker, even more impenetrable. I sat on a log, as close to the fire as I could get without burning my boots, and I held my hands out to the heat. I couldn't stop shivering. I kept my headlamp on, the beam cutting a shaky path through the trees as I scanned the perimeter of my camp every 30 seconds. I was listening so hard my ears started to ache. I heard the fire, my own breathing, and the blood pounding in my head. That was it. The silence was a presence in itself. My friends were supposed to show up the next evening. The thought of having to spend the entire night alone with that out there was almost too much. I thought about packing up and driving home right then, but my truck was 400 feet away, down a dark path. The thought of walking that path alone in the dark, with that feeling of being watched, I couldn't do it. I felt trapped by my own campfire. I must have sat there for 2 hours, just staring into the flames, jumping at every little noise. I finally forced myself to make some dinner, but I had no appetite. I just moved the food around my plate. I kept thinking about my fish. I'd left the stringer in the water. I should pull it out, clean them, get them on ice. It was a chore, something to do, a reason to move. I stood up, grabbed my big flashlight this time, and walked down to the lake. The beam of light bounced ahead of me, illuminating the path in jerky bursts. My whole body was tense, ready to bolt. I got to the spot where I'd tied the stringer. The branch was still there, the rope was still tied, but the stringer was on the shore. It was lying on the mud and pebbles, about 5 feet from the water's edge. I'd left it in the water. I know I did. I walked over, my boots squelching in the mud. I shined my light on it. The walleye was still on the metal stringer, but they were just heads and tails. The entire middle section of each fish was gone. It was a clean job, like something had just bitten the bodies right off. There were no ragged tears, no chew marks. It was a clean, almost surgical removal. The heads and tails were still connected by the metal chain, lying there in a sad, grotesque line. I just stared. My brain couldn't process it. I'd had 5 good-sized walleye on there. That's a lot of fish. The stringer itself, with all that weight, was heavy. I remember it was a struggle to lift it out of the water when it was full, probably 30 pounds of dead weight. To get the fish off, you'd have to lift the whole thing out or have incredible strength to hold it steady in the water while you did that. But that wasn't what got me. It was the cleanliness of it. There was no mess, no blood, no scales scattered around. It was as if the middles of the fish had just ceased to exist. I reached down and picked up the stringer. It was so light now, just the clinking of the metal and the limp, empty heads and tails. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't an otter or a raccoon. They'd make a mess. They'd drag the whole thing away. This was something else. I dropped the stringer. It landed with a dull clank on the stones. I backed away from the water, my flashlight beam skittering wildly across the surface of the lake and into the black wall of trees on the other side. I felt exposed, like a spotlight was on me. I turned and half ran, half stumbled back to my camp, my breath catching in my chest. I spent the rest of the night inside my tent, fully dressed, with my hatchet in my hand. I didn't sleep. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, listening. The feeling of being watched never went away. It was like a weight on the tent, a pressure in the air. I heard things too, not the normal night sounds. Once I heard a deep, guttural knock, like someone hitting a hollow tree with a giant sledgehammer. It was far away, but the sound carried through the woods and vibrated right through the ground into my body. Another time, I heard what sounded like heavy bipedal footsteps moving through the brush, circling my camp. They'd stop for a long time, then start again. I just lay there, frozen, my knuckles white around the handle of my hatchet, praying for the sun to come up. My friends showed up the next evening. I was a wreck. I hadn't slept. I was jumpy. And I probably wasn't making much sense. I told them about the footprints, about the fish. They were skeptical, of course, thought I'd maybe had a bad dream or let my imagination run wild. We built a bigger fire, cracked open some beers, and for a little while, with their company and the noise, I almost managed to convince myself I'd overreacted. Then, just as the last light was fading, we heard it. It started low, a rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it rose into a long, piercing howl. It wasn't a wolf. I've heard wolves. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't any animal I'd ever heard in my life. It was a deep, resonant, powerful sound that seemed to shake the very air. It went on for what felt like a full minute, rising and falling, full of something that sounded ancient and intelligent and utterly alien. It echoed across the lake and then just stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any silence I've ever experienced. We all just sat there, frozen, our beers halfway to our mouths. Nobody said a word. We just looked at each other, and in their eyes I saw the same primal fear that was clawing its way up my own spine. They believed me now. We packed up and left first thing in the morning. We didn't even fish. My friends, they never went back to that spot. They rent a cabin miles away now for our annual trip. But me, I don't know why, but I still go back. I camp there alone every year. It's like I have to. I sit by the fire, and I feel that same crawling sensation on my neck. I look at the tree line, and I know they're still there. Watching. I never see them. I just see the signs sometimes. A branch broken too high up, a rock placed somewhere it wasn't before. It took me a year, after a lot of late-night internet digging, to finally put a name to what I think was out there. Sasquatch. A family of them. It sounds crazy, I know. But when you've seen that footprint, when you've heard that sound, when you've seen what was left of your fish, you stop caring what sounds crazy. You just know what you know. I was observed by something that lives in the deep woods, something that doesn't want to be found but doesn't mind letting you know it's there. And that knowledge, that feeling of being just a visitor in a world that belongs to something else, it never leaves you. It's with me right now. Story 8. All right, I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess it's time to just type it out. I've read enough stories on here that sound a lot like mine, and if I don't get this out, it's just gonna keep eating at me. This happened back in 2003. I'm pretty sure it was late winter or maybe early spring. The weather was that weird Florida in-between, not cold, but not yet sweltering, just kind of mild and damp. My buddy and I decided to take our kayaks out on this river in Orange County. I won't say which one exactly, just that it was one of those slow, tea-colored rivers that wind through a lot of woods and swamp. We'd done this route a bunch of times. It was a Saturday. I remember that much, because we'd both gotten off work the day before and were just looking to kill a day on the water. We put in around 10 in the morning. The sun was out, but it was hazy, and the air had that wet chill that sinks into your bones if you stop moving for too long. I was in my green kayak, the one with the little scrape on the side. From that time I dragged it over some oyster shells. My friend was in his blue one, lagging behind me like he always did, taking his sweet time and just soaking in the scenery. I was always the one pushing ahead, wanting to see what was around the next bend. That day, I was amusing myself by scaring the alligators. It's a dumb thing to do, I know that now, but back then it just seemed like harmless fun. They'd be sunning themselves on the banks, looking like ancient logs, and I'd paddle just close enough to startle them. They'd hiss and slide into the water with this heavy, sluggish splash. It never got old to me. I remember the sound of my paddle dipping in and out of the water, the way the droplets would cling to the blade for a second before falling back. My shoulders were starting to ache a little, that good tired feeling you get from exercise. The river had just straightened out into one of those long, boring stretches. Cypress trees and thick undergrowth crowded the banks on both sides, their roots exposed and tangled like giant spider legs in the water. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get way out in the wild. No traffic noise, no people, just the sound of my paddle and the occasional bird call from deep in the woods. I was maybe 50, 60 yards ahead of my friend at this point. I remember glancing back and seeing him as a tiny blue speck, just rounding the bend I'd already passed. I turned back around, facing forward, and that's when the wind changed. It had been barely a breeze coming from behind me, pushing me gently downriver. But all of a sudden it shifted. It came sweeping out of the woods to my left, a solid gust that hit me square in the face, and with it came the smell. I've spent a lot of time trying to find the words for that smell, and I still can't do it justice. It wasn't just one thing, it was a mix of things, all of them awful. It was a heavy, wet, musty odor like a pile of old mushrooms and decaying leaves that had been left to rot in a sealed plastic bag. But underneath that was something sharp and pungent, like really strong, soured sweat, the kind that's been baked into clothes for weeks. And there was an animal tang to it, like a wet dog, but 1,000 times stronger. It was so thick and cloying it felt like I was breathing it in through my mouth, like I could taste it at the back of my throat. It coated the inside of my nose and clung there. I actually gagged, my eyes watering instantly. I'd never smelled anything like it in my life, not in the woods, not at a zoo, nowhere. My first instinct was to look for a dead animal, a deer or a boar or something big that had died close to the water. That had to be it. So I turned my head toward the bank, toward where the wind was coming from, my eyes scanning the dark line of trees and shadows, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't on the bank. It was back in the woods, maybe 30 or 40 feet from the water's edge. The undergrowth was thick, but there was a patch of lighter brown fur moving. It wasn't walking, it was moving fast, a quick, powerful, crashing kind of movement. The fur was a light brown, almost tan, and it was shiny like it was wet or oily, catching little glints of the hazy sun that filtered through the canopy. I didn't see a head or legs, not clearly. I just saw this big, broad patch of that fur, maybe 4 or 5 feet up from the ground, rippling through the trees. It was huge. Whatever that fur was attached to, it was way bigger than a man. The sight of it only lasted for a split second. The second my brain registered what I was seeing, that it wasn't a deer, wasn't a bear, wasn't anything I could name, the sound started. It was a series of loud, sharp cracks and pops, like someone was stepping on a big pile of dry branches. But these weren't little twigs. These were the sounds of small trees breaking, not falling over, but snapping. Crack, crack, pop. The noise was incredibly forceful, like whatever was making it was so big and so strong. It just plowed through the woods without a second thought. It wasn't a careful walk. It was a full-on, panicked crash. The sound moved away from the river, getting fainter but no less violent sounding. A wave of destruction receding into the distance. I could hear the splintering of wood, the rustle and smash of leaves and branches being shoved aside with tremendous power. It was a sound of pure, raw strength, and it was terrifying. And then, just like that, it stopped. The crashing ceased. The woods went dead silent. No more birds, no more insects, just the gentle lapping of water against my kayak. The only thing that remained was the smell. That god-awful, suffocating smell was still there, hanging in the air like a foul cloud. It wasn't fading. If anything, now that the thing was gone, my senses were completely overwhelmed by it. It was in my hair, on my clothes, in my lungs. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my ears. My hands were clamped onto the paddle, my knuckles white. I was frozen, just staring at the spot in the woods where I'd seen it. My mind was racing, trying to process it. What the hell was that? A bear? But Florida black bears don't get that big, and their fur is black, not light brown, and they don't smell like that, and they don't break trees like that. This was different. This was something else. The smell was making me nauseous. I felt a wave of dizziness and realized I'd been holding my breath. I sucked in a gasp, and that was a mistake, because I just got another lungful of that rotten, musky stench. I started to panic. I needed to get out of there. I needed to get away from that smell. I started paddling, not the easy, rhythmic strokes from before. I was paddling hard, frantic, digging the blade deep into the water and pulling with all my strength. My kayak surged forward. I didn't look back at the woods. I just focused on the river ahead, on putting as much distance between me and that spot as possible. My arms burned with the effort, but I didn't care. The adrenaline was pumping through me, a cold, sharp fear that made every muscle tight. A minute or two later, I heard my friend calling out from behind me, "Hey, you okay? You took off like a bat out of hell." I slowed down, my chest heaving. I turned to look at him. He was catching up, a confused look on his face. I must have looked like a ghost, pale and wide-eyed. Did you smell that?" I managed to ask, my voice shaky. He paddled up alongside me. "Smell what?" I smelled something kind of funky back there for a second, like a dead fish or something. "Why? What's wrong with you?" He hadn't seen it. He hadn't really smelled it, not like I had. He'd been too far back. The wind had shifted again, and the smell was already dissipating, thank God. I just shook my head, not knowing what to say. "Nothing," I mumbled. "Just thought I saw something. Let's just keep going." I couldn't tell him. It sounded insane. Even in my own head, I saw a big, brown, hairy thing that stank to high heaven and broke trees as it ran away. He would have laughed at me, so I kept my mouth shut for the rest of the trip. I was quiet, lost in my own thoughts, going over and over those few seconds in my mind, the shift in the wind, the smell, the glimpse of shiny brown fur, the sound of the trees breaking, the silence. We finished the trip, loaded the kayaks onto my truck and drove home. I was jumpy the whole way, scanning the trees along the roadside. The rest of the day I felt off, distant. My wife asked me if I was okay, and I just said I was tired from paddling. For years, I didn't tell anyone. I tried to rationalize it. A bear with a weird color phase, a wild boar, even though they don't have fur like that and aren't that big. My mind offered up every possible explanation, but none of them fit. None of them explained the sheer size I sensed, the power of its movement, and most of all, that smell. I'd heard stories, of course, campfire tales about Bigfoot and its legendary stench. But I'd always written those off as nonsense, especially for Florida. We have gators and panthers, not giant hairy hominids. Then, a few years ago, I was watching some documentary late at night. One of those shows about unexplained mysteries. They were talking about Bigfoot sightings, and they played a recording of a guy describing an encounter. He started talking about the smell. He used almost the exact same words I would have. A mix of rotten meat, wet dog, and a powerful, musky body odor that you can taste. My blood ran cold. Then another person described the sound of branches snapping, the way the creature moved through the forest with such brute force. That was it for me. That was the moment the last bit of my skepticism crumbled. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't seen a bear. I had seen what those people had seen. I had smelled what they had smelled. The terror of that moment on the river came rushing back, fresh and vivid. The memory of that smell seemed to fill the room. Even now, as I'm typing this, my hands are a little unsteady. It's been over 20 years, but it feels like it happened yesterday. That one day, those few seconds, completely rewired my understanding of what might be out there in the woods. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw, what I heard, and what I smelled. And I know that I've never ever gone back to that part of the river again. Story 9. It was January of 2020. I'd owned this little hunting cabin for about 5 years by then, a place way up near the Canadian border in northern Minnesota. It wasn't much, just a one-room shack with a wood stove, no running water, and an outhouse 50 feet into the woods. But it was mine. I went up there every winter for a couple of weeks just to be alone, to get away from the noise of everything, my job, the city, people. I just wanted the silence. That particular day had been normal. I'd spent the afternoon splitting firewood, my breath pluming in the air, the only sound the steady thwack of the axe and the crunch of my boots in the deep snow. The sky was that flat, pale grey it gets in deep winter, and by 4 in the afternoon, the light was already starting to fade. Twilight comes early and hangs around for a long time up there. It's not like a switch flipping from day to night. It's a long, slow sinking into blues and purples. I was just finishing up, stacking the last of the split logs under the lean-to by the side of the cabin, when I decided to get the porch light on. It was one of those motion sensor jobs, but I usually just flipped it on manually at dusk so I could see to get more wood if I needed it later. I walked up the 3 wooden steps to the small porch, my joints aching a little from the cold and the work, and I flipped the switch. The yellow glow from the single bulb pushed back the gloom, illuminating a small circle of the packed snow in the clearing in front of the cabin. And that's when I saw it. At the very edge of the tree line, right where the light started to get swallowed by the shadows of the pines, there was a figure. It was just standing there, perfectly still. My brain didn't want to process it at first. It was tall, so damn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was just a black silhouette against the dark trees, but the shape was all wrong. It was too broad in the shoulders, and its arms seemed too long, hanging down past its knees. But the worst part was the eyes. They caught the porch light and reflected it back at me. Not like a deer's eyes, which glow green. This was a dull, reddish orange, like two dying embers staring right into me. There was no blinking, no movement. It was just watching me. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it seized up completely in my chest. A cold that had nothing to do with the January air shot down my spine and into my legs. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a moose. It wasn't anything I had ever seen or even imagined. Every instinct in my body, every primitive part of my brain started screaming at once. Danger. Get inside, now. I didn't run. Running felt like it would be an invitation, like it would trigger something. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, my eyes locked on those two glowing points. Then another. My hand fumbled behind me for the doorknob. The old brass was freezing cold against my skin. I turned it, pushed the door open just enough to slide through, and then I slammed it shut. The sound of the heavy wooden door closing and the deadbolt sliding home with a solid thunk was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I stood there for a second, my back pressed against the door, breathing hard. My whole body was trembling. I could feel the rough grain of the wood through my flannel shirt. I forced myself to move to the window next to the door, peering out through the glass, which was already starting to frost around the edges. It was still there, but it had moved. It had taken one step out of the shadows, into the very edge of the porch light's glow. It wasn't a silhouette anymore. I could see it was covered in hair, a long, shaggy, dark brown or black coat. It was built like a powerlifter, massively thick through the chest and legs. Its head was sort of conical, sitting directly on its shoulders with no real neck to speak of, and those eyes were still fixed on the cabin. Then it made a sound. It started low, a deep, rumbling vibration that I felt in my teeth more than I heard. It built into a guttural moan, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of its lungs. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it was heavy. It pressed in on the cabin, on my ears, on my chest. I could feel it tightening around my ribs, making it hard to breathe. It was a sound of pure, raw power, and it was a threat. There was no question in my mind what that sound meant. The moan trailed off, and for a second, there was just the silence again. Then it took a step forward. Its feet, or whatever they were, made a distinct thump in the snow, a heavy, solid sound. Thump, then another. Thump. It was walking toward the cabin. Its gait was awkward, like it was unused to moving on two legs, but there was a terrifying purpose to it. It wasn't lurching or stumbling, it was marching. It stopped about 10 feet from my front door, just outside the circle of the brightest light. It stood there, and its head turned slowly, scanning the cabin. I ducked back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to get out. I was afraid it had seen me. I crouched down low below the windowsill and just listened. Thump, thump, thump. It was circling. I could hear the heavy, deliberate footsteps moving around to the side of the cabin. I crawled on my hands and knees across the rough wooden floorboards to the next window, the one on the west side. I risked a glance over the sill. It was right there, its back to me, moving past the window. It was so close I could see the individual clumps of matted hair on its back, see the way the muscles moved under its hide. It was immense. The top of its head cleared the top of the window frame, and the window is at least 6 feet off the ground. It completed its circuit and ended up back in front of the cabin. I stayed low, crawling from window to window, trying to keep track of it. The fear was a live wire in my gut, sizzling and hot. This was my sanctuary, my safe place, and it felt like a paper box now, flimsy, insignificant. Then the banging started. It wasn't a knock, it was a blow, a huge open-handed slap against the wall of the cabin, right next to the front door. The whole structure shuddered. The windows in their frames rattled violently. A puff of dust drifted down from the rafters. I yelped. I couldn't help it. The sound was so sudden, so immensely powerful. It hit the wall again. Whump! The log walls were solid, 8-inch pine, but they groaned under the impact. I scrambled over to the corner where I kept my rifle, a 30-06. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the bolt open to check the chamber. I had a box of shells on the shelf. I fumbled one, the brass cartridge clattering on the floor. The sound was tiny and pathetic against the monster outside. I loaded the rifle, the click of the bolt sliding home a small, definitive sound of my own. The banging stopped. For a long moment there was nothing, just the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears. I stayed in the corner, the rifle gripped so tight my knuckles were white, listening. Then a new sound started. It came from the woods, a sharp, hard crack, like someone taking a big branch and smacking it against a tree trunk. It echoed through the silent forest. Then, from a different direction, maybe 100 yards away, another one answered. Crack. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just one. There were more of them. The knocks started coming faster, from all around the cabin now. North, south, east, west. They weren't random. They were a conversation, a call and response. They were communicating. They were coordinating. I was surrounded. The isolation I had always cherished, the miles and miles of empty wilderness, had become a prison. There was no one to hear me scream, no one to help. The creature outside started pacing again, its heavy footsteps a constant, ominous drumbeat underneath the rhythm of the tree knocks. I could hear a low growl now, a continuous rumble that seemed to emanate from its chest. It was a sound of pure aggression. I was crouched by the wood stove, the rifle across my knees, just trying to breathe, when I heard a different sound from the window behind me, a soft, scraping sound. I turned my head slowly. A face was pressed against the glass. It was huge, wider than a man's, and covered in the same dark, coarse hair. The window pane distorted it a little, but I could see its features clearly in the light from the oil lamp I had lit inside. It had a heavy, prominent brow ridge, and beneath it, those deep-set eyes were fixed on me. They were intelligent. They weren't the blank eyes of an animal. They were studying me. There was a curiosity in them, but it was a cruel, predatory curiosity. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I was just staring into the face of this thing, this impossible thing, separated from me by a 1/4 inch of glass. Then its lips pulled back from its mouth. It didn't have lips like ours. It was more of a slit. And when it opened, I saw thick, yellowed teeth. It wasn't a snarl. It was like a smile, a horrible, knowing smile. A massive hand came up and pressed against the glass next to its face. The hand was enormous, the fingers thick and long with dark, dirty-looking nails. It spread its fingers wide, and then it slowly dragged its hand down the glass. It left a thick, greasy smear behind, a foul, musky odor, thick and pungent like a wet dog mixed with rotting meat, seeped through the cracks around the window frame. The stench was so strong it made my eyes water. That's when I snapped. The smell, the sight of that smear, the intelligence in its eyes. It was too much. A raw, terrified scream tore out of my throat. I brought the rifle up, fumbling with the safety. The creature outside the window reacted to my scream. Its eyes widened, and it pulled its head back for a second. Then it roared. It wasn't the low moan from before. This was a full-throated, deafening bellow of rage that shook the very air. It drew its arm back and slammed its fist through the window. The glass exploded inward, showering me with sharp, cold shards. A long, hairy arm, thick as a small log, thrust into the cabin, its huge hand clawing at the air, searching for me. I didn't think. I just fired. The roar of the rifle in the small cabin was deafening. The muzzle flash lit up the room for a split second. I saw the bullet tear into its forearm, a spray of dark blood splattering against the log wall behind it. The creature let out a shriek, a high-pitched, agonized sound that was somehow worse than the roar. The arm was yanked back out through the broken window, leaving a trail of blood and shattered glass. Silence. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was complete and total silence. No knocks, no growls, no footsteps. The only sound was the ringing in my ears from the gunshot and my own ragged, sobbing breaths. The cold winter air poured in through the broken window, but I was sweating, my entire body soaked with a cold sweat of pure terror. I stayed there, rifle pointed at the empty window frame for what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 30. I don't know. Time had lost all meaning. Then the growling started again. It was lower now, more of a furious muttering. The pacing resumed. The tree knocks started up, slower this time, more deliberate. They weren't trying to break in anymore. They were just letting me know they were still there, that they weren't going anywhere. The rest of the night was the longest of my life. I sat with my back in a corner, the rifle across my lap, staring at the door and the broken window. The creatures, I knew there were at least 3 or 4 now, paced and growled and knocked on trees. They never tried to break in again, but the threat was constant, a psychic pressure that was slowly crushing my mind. I was a rat in a cage, and they were the cats, waiting for me to make a move, or just waiting for me to break. I watched the darkness through the broken window. I watched the stars wheel slowly across the sky. I watched for the first hint of gray in the east. The night felt like it would never end. And then it did. It was subtle at first. The black outside the window softened to a deep blue. The shapes of the trees began to separate from the darkness. The knocks had stopped about an hour before, and the growling had faded away. As the sky lightened to a pale, milky gray, the last sound I heard was a single final tree knock. It came from a long way off, deep in the forest. It sounded almost like a farewell or a promise. Then, nothing. Just the normal morning sounds of the woods. A chickadee calling, the creak of a tree in the wind. I didn't move until the sun was fully up, casting long, weak shadows across the snow. My body was stiff and aching from sitting in one position all night. My mind felt bruised, hollowed out. I finally forced myself to stand, my legs screaming in protest. I kept the rifle in my hands as I walked to the door. I unlocked it and pushed it open slowly, flinching at the creak of the hinges. The scene outside was a war zone. The snow in the clearing was completely churned up, a mess of huge, deep footprints. They were easily 18 inches long and half as wide. The tracks circled the cabin over and over, a chaotic record of the night's terror. I saw spots of dark, frozen blood in the snow beneath the broken window. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led to the tree line, and there I saw where one of them had just stood, gripping a young pine tree. The bark was shredded where its fingers had dug in, and the trunk was splintered as if it had been shaken violently, and the smell, that same musky, foul stench, hung in the cold morning air, clinging to everything. I went back inside. I packed my things in a blind, frantic hurry, throwing everything into the back of my truck. I didn't care about organization. I just needed to be gone. I drove out of there that morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought it would break. I didn't look back. I went to the local sheriff's office in the nearest town, a 30-mile drive. I tried to tell them what happened. I showed them the pictures I took of the footprints, of the broken window, of the splintered tree. The deputy, a young guy, listened with a patient smile. He suggested it was probably a bear, a big one, maybe rabid. He said the footprints were probably just melted and distorted. The tree, a porcupine maybe. He was polite, but his eyes said it all. He thought I was a crazy city slicker who'd gotten spooked by the woods. I didn't argue. I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. I knew what had surrounded me all night. I put the cabin on the market the week I got back home. Sold it for a loss to the first person who made an offer. I didn't care about the money. I just never wanted to see that place again. It's been a few years now. I don't go into the woods anymore. I don't even like camping in a state park. What haunts me isn't just the size of the creature or its strength. It's the intelligence, the way they communicated with those knocks, the way they coordinated, the way that one looked at me through the window like it was sizing me up, understanding that I was a thinking being and deciding it didn't care. They weren't just animals. They were something else, something ancient and territorial, and they made it very clear that I was the intruder, that the woods belonged to them. And I believe it. I believe it with every fiber of my being. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night hearing those tree knocks, smelling that god-awful smell, and my chest just tightens up with a fear so pure and so old. I feel like a caveman hiding from a predator in the dark. I can't explain it. I don't even try anymore. I just know what happened to me. Story 10. I was out on the west pasture, the one that slopes down toward the river. It was one of those late summer days that feels heavy, the air thick with humidity and the smell of cut grass and damp earth. My shirt was stuck to my back with sweat, and my shoulders ached in that familiar deep way they do after a long day of manual labor. I'd been at it since sunup, building a new stretch of post and rail fence to keep our small herd of Herefords from wandering too far down toward the water. The old fence had been there since my granddad's time, and a storm the previous week had finally taken out a good 50-foot section. This pasture has the best view on the whole property. From the crest of the hill, you can see the entire valley unfold below you. The winding silver thread of the river, the dark line of the forest on the other side, and way off in the distance, the hazy shapes of the mountains. It's a view I never get tired of, even after all these years. That day, the sun was starting its slow drop toward the horizon, casting long, deep shadows that made the green of the valley look almost impossibly rich. I was just finishing up tamping down the soil around a new post, my maul resting against my leg as I wiped the sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. I remember thinking I had maybe another hour of good light left, just enough to get this last section secure before calling it a day. That's when my eyes drifted down toward the river, almost out of habit, just taking in the scenery. And I saw it. Something broke the surface of the water near the far bank. At first, my brain, tired from the sun and the work, just registered it as a log or a large branch being carried by the current. But logs don't stand up. This thing did. It emerged from the river in one fluid, powerful motion. Water sluiced off its body in sheets. My first immediate thought was, bear. We have black bears around here. You see them sometimes foraging at the tree line or, rarely, fishing in the river. But this was wrong. A bear climbs out of the water on all fours. It lumbers. This thing, it rose up onto its two hind legs and just stood there for a second, as if getting its bearings. The distance was maybe 300 yards, a good ways off, but the evening light was clear and sharp. I could see it plainly. It was massive, just unbelievably, gut-churningly huge. Downstream, along the near side of the river, a crew of 4 or 5 guys from the railway were doing maintenance on the tracks. I could see their bright orange and yellow vests, little dots of color moving around. I used them as a scale, my eyes flicking between the men and this thing. The railroad workers are grown men. This creature was 2, maybe even 3 times their size. It wasn't just tall, it was thick, built like a power lifter, but on a scale that didn't make any sense. Its head was big and blocky, and it seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, with almost no neck to speak of. Its arms were long, I mean really long. They hung down past its knees, swinging slightly as it took its first steps. The fur covering its body was a dark, wet brown, almost black from the river water, and it clung to its form, highlighting the sheer mass of its shoulders and back. It started walking. It didn't run. It didn't hurry. It just moved along the riverbank with a calm, deliberate pace, heading upstream. and it had this slight sway to its gait, a rolling motion from side to side. It wasn't clumsy, it was purposeful. It moved like it owned the ground it was walking on, with a kind of primal confidence that froze the blood in my veins. My heart, which had been beating a steady, tired rhythm, suddenly kicked into a frantic, hammering gallop against my ribs. I couldn't move. I just stood there, one hand still on the maul handle, my knuckles white, my mouth had gone completely dry. This wasn't a bear. A bear on its hind legs is awkward, tentative. This thing was built for it. Its posture was straight, its movement smooth and powerful. I heard a sharp intake of breath from behind me. I'd almost forgotten my cousin was there. He was about 20 yards away, untangling a coil of barbed wire. I turned my head just enough to see him. His face had lost all its color. He was staring, jaw slack, at the same spot on the riverbank. He saw it too. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't hallucinating from the heat. The confirmation should have been a relief, but it only doubled the fear. This was real. This was happening. We both watched, utterly silent, as this immense man-like creature walked along the edge of the river. It was heading for a bend where the bank curved and a cluster of willow trees grew thick. The whole time, it never once looked in our direction. It just kept on with that steady, swaying walk, as if it was just going about its business, and then it reached the bend. It didn't push through the willows. It just stepped around the curve of the bank and was gone. One moment it was there, a solid, impossible silhouette against the shimmering water, and the next, the riverbank was empty. The willows weren't even shaking. It had vanished as quietly as it had appeared. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of insects and the faint metallic clinking from the railroad crew. Those guys, separated from the river by a dense hedgerow of hawthorn and wild rose, were completely oblivious. They were laughing about something. I could just hear the faint echo of it carried on the breeze. They had no idea what had just walked past them, not 50 yards away. My cousin finally broke the silence. His voice was a hoarse whisper. What in God's name was that? I couldn't answer. I just shook my head, my eyes still glued to the spot where it had disappeared. My body was starting to come back online, and with it came a wave of physical sensations. A cold sweat had broken out all over my body, a stark contrast to the heat of the day. My legs felt weak and shaky, like the bones had been removed. My hands were trembling. I had to lean on the maul to stay upright. We stood there until the light began to fade from purple to deep blue, staring at that empty riverbank. We didn't say much. What was there to say? We'd both seen it. We packed up our tools in a hurry, the usual after-work routine feeling alien and pointless. The drive back to the house was quiet. Every shadow in the ditches seemed to move. Every dark shape between the trees looked like it had shoulders and a swinging gait. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, seeing it over and over again, the way the water poured off its back, the way it stood so tall, the sheer, overwhelming size of it. My mind kept circling back to one thing, its stealth. It had moved through that environment without a sound. It had appeared and disappeared like a ghost. The railroad crew, so close, never had a clue. The next morning, with the sun high and bold, a different kind of feeling set in, a desperate need for proof. Maybe it had been a bear, a weird, deformed, gigantic bear. I had to know. I drove back out to the pasture, my nerves stretched tight. The place looked so normal, so peaceful in the daylight. Birds were singing, the cows were grazing. It was hard to reconcile this tranquility with the terror of the previous evening. I went straight down the hill, my boots slipping on the dew-wet grass. I didn't stop until I was standing right on the spot where I'd seen it come out of the water. The riverbank there was a mess of mud, gravel and debris, twigs, leaves and river stones worn smooth by the current. I searched. I got down on my hands and knees and scanned every inch of that mud. I looked for a footprint, a claw mark, anything that would show a creature of that immense weight had passed through. There was nothing. Not a single track. I sat back on my heels, the dampness from the ground seeping through my jeans. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It had walked along the riverbank, but it had stayed on the gravel and the scattered debris. It had consciously or instinctively chosen a path that wouldn't leave a trace. It had used the river's own litter to hide its passage. That was the moment the real terror set in, deeper and colder than the initial shock. The size was one thing. A monster you can see is a monster you can, in some way, understand. But this was a different kind of fear. This was the fear of something that knew how to move unseen, something that could be right there, in the woods at the edge of your property, and you'd never know it. The stealth was more terrifying than the size. It meant it was smart. It meant it didn't want to be found. I never saw it again. I've spent countless hours in those fields since then, my eyes constantly drawn to the river, searching the shadows under the trees. But there's never been anything. No sound, no sign, just the quiet, flowing water and the memory of that massive, silent shape moving through the twilight. A secret that walked out of the river and then just faded back into the land, leaving me with nothing but a cold, unshakable dread and the absolute certainty that I saw something that shouldn't exist. I can't explain it. I don't even try anymore. I just know what I saw. Story 11. It all started when I went to visit my sister in Long County, South Georgia. She'd just moved into this old property a few weeks before, and I drove down to help her settle in. The place was surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides, and beyond that there was this vast swamp that seemed to go on forever. The air always had this damp, heavy feel to it, like you were breathing in wet cloth. And the sounds at night, well, they were something else. Crickets, frogs, and things I couldn't name, all blending into this constant hum that made the silence feel even heavier when it came. I pulled up to her house late in the afternoon. The sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows through the pine trees. Her place was a modest, single-story home with a wide front porch, and right away, I noticed how isolated it felt. The nearest neighbor was a good mile down the road, and the woods pressed in close, like they were watching. My sister came out to greet me, and I could see the tiredness in her eyes. She'd mentioned on the phone that things had been weird since they moved in, but she didn't go into details until later. We spent the first couple of hours unpacking some boxes and catching up. Her son, my nephew, was playing in the yard, and my elderly dad was there too, helping out where he could. Dad's in his 70s, but he's sharp as a tack and doesn't spook easily. As the evening wore on, my sister started talking about the noises. She said it began not long after they moved in. Screaming sounds that didn't sound like any animal she knew, deep howls that echoed from the woods, and this skunky smell that would drift in on the breeze, strong enough to make your eyes water. She said it happened mostly at night, and she'd find herself waking up, heart pounding, just listening. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was probably coyotes or bobcats, something normal for the area. But then, as it got darker, things started to shift. We were all sitting in the living room, the TV on low, when I first heard it. Something heavy ran across the front porch. I mean, heavy. It wasn't a dog or a deer. It sounded like a person, but bigger, with footsteps that thudded so hard, I felt the vibration through the floorboards. My sister went quiet, and we all looked at each other. My nephew, who's usually a chatterbox, froze and stared at the door. "You hear that?" my sister whispered, and I just nodded. My heart was starting to beat faster, that kind of uneasy thump you get when your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. We waited, but nothing else happened. After a few minutes, we tried to brush it off, but the air in the room felt thicker, like we were all holding our breath. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I was lying awake in the guest room. The house was quiet except for the hum of the AC, but outside, the woods were alive. I heard it again, That skunky odor wafted in through the window I'd cracked open, so strong it made me cough. Then came the screaming. It was high-pitched and raw, like something in agony, but it had this weird, almost human quality to it. I sat up in bed, my skin crawling. I've been camping all my life, heard plenty of animal noises, but this was different. It felt directed, like it was meant to be heard. I got up and peered out the window. The moon was out, casting a pale light over the yard, but I couldn't see anything except shadows shifting in the trees. My hands were trembling, and I had to force myself to take slow breaths. I thought about waking someone up, but I didn't want to scare my nephew or dad, so I just stood there listening until the sound faded away. When I finally crawled back into bed, I didn't sleep much. Every little noise had me jerking awake, and that skunky smell lingered in the room, clinging to my clothes. The next morning, things felt off. The sun was up, but the property still had this eerie stillness to it. My sister was in the kitchen making coffee, and she looked exhausted. She told me that my nephew had seen something the night before, right after dinner. He'd been playing near the storage barn out back and came running in, pale as a ghost, saying he saw a large figure crouched down beside it. He said it was tall and dark, with broad shoulders, and it moved away so fast he barely caught a glimpse. She'd brushed it off as his imagination, but now, with everything else, she wasn't so sure. We went outside after breakfast to check the yard. The grass was damp with dew and the air was cool, but that skunky smell was still there, faint but persistent. My dad joined us, and we walked around the property. He's a practical man, spent his whole life in rural areas, and he didn't say much, just observed. We got to the storage barn, and that's when we saw them. Large, deep footprints in the soft dirt near the fence line. They were huge, bigger than any human foot, and the impressions were so deep, it looked like whatever made them weighed a ton. My sister pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she'd taken a few days earlier. More footprints in the same spot, just as big. My stomach dropped. This wasn't some prank or animal, this was something else. As the day went on, the tension built. We tried to go about our normal activities, unpacking boxes, fixing a leaky faucet, but every time we stepped outside, I felt like we were being watched. The woods seemed closer, the trees like silent sentinels. My nephew didn't want to play outside anymore, and he stayed close to the house, his eyes darting toward the tree line. Around midday, my dad decided to take a walk out to the fenced pasture at the back of the property. He likes to stretch his legs, and he said he wanted to see if there were more signs. I went with him, partly out of curiosity and partly because I didn't want him out there alone. The pasture is a wide, open space surrounded by a rusty old fence, with the woods on one side and the swamp on the other. The grass was tall and swaying in the breeze, and the sun was bright overhead, but it didn't feel warm or comforting. We were about halfway across when my dad stopped dead in his tracks. He pointed toward the tree line, and that's when I saw it too. A full-grown Sasquatch, I don't know what else to call it, was running across the pasture. It was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, covered in dark, shaggy hair, and it moved with this powerful, loping gait that ate up the ground. It wasn't clumsy, it was smooth and fast, like it belonged there. My heart slammed into my throat and I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, watching as it disappeared into the woods on the other side. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My dad was breathing heavily beside me, his face pale. "Did you see that?" he whispered, and I could only nod. My hands were shaking so bad I had to clasp them together to steady them. We hurried back to the house, not saying much, but the fear was palpable. When we told my sister, her face went slack with disbelief, but then she nodded slowly, like it confirmed something she'd been afraid to admit. Back inside, we all sat around the kitchen table, trying to process what we'd seen. My sister pulled up the photo of the footprints on her phone again, and we stared at them. That's when the realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just one creature. It might be a family. The consistent encounters, the screams, the howls, the smells, the sightings, all pointed to something living nearby, something that had been here long before my sister moved in. The property had been vacant for years before they bought it, and now it made sense. These things had claimed it as their own. The rest of the day passed in a blur. We stayed inside, the doors locked, the windows shut, even though it was hot. Every noise from outside made us jump. As evening fell, the sounds started up again, more screaming, closer this time, and that skunky odor seeped into the house no matter what we did. My nephew was clinging to my sister, and my dad kept pacing, his jaw tight. I felt this overwhelming dread, like we were trapped in a place we shouldn't be. We decided to call it a night early, but none of us slept. I lay in bed, listening to the howls and thumps outside, my mind racing. At one point, I heard something heavy moving around the house again, and I just curled up, pulling the covers over my head like a kid. The fear was so raw, so consuming, that I could taste it, metallic and sour. The next morning, we found more footprints near the porch, fresh and deep, like whatever it was had been right outside our door. My sister took more photos, but we didn't know what to do with them. Who would believe us? We packed up my car, and I left later that day, promising to check in often. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the woods looming behind the house, dark and impenetrable. Even now, years later, my sister still lives there, and she says the disturbances haven't stopped. She's learned to live with it, but she never goes out after dark, and she always keeps a light on. I've never gone back for more than a day visit, and every time I do, that same fear creeps in. I don't have any answers, no neat explanations. All I know is what I saw, what I felt, and the chill that never really goes away. Story 12. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for a while now. I live on a decent-sized property in South Carolina, kind of out in the sticks, surrounded by woods that stretch back for what feels like miles. It's usually quiet out here, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own thoughts too clearly. But that day was different. It was around noon, and I was inside the house, just finishing up some leftover coffee and thinking about what to make for lunch. The sun was high, beating down on the yard, and everything felt heavy and still, like the air was holding its breath. I've got 2 dogs, a pair of mutts I rescued a few years back, and they're usually pretty chill, maybe barking at a squirrel or the mail truck, but nothing crazy. They're kept in a pen out back, about 50 feet from the house, with a sturdy wire fence. I put up myself. That day, though, their barking was something else. It wasn't the usual yapping. It was this frantic, panicked sound that made the hair on my arm stand up straight away. I remember setting my mug down on the counter, the ceramic clinking too loud in the sudden silence when I stopped moving. My heart was already starting to pick up pace, like it knew something I didn't. I headed out the back door, the screen slamming shut behind me, and the heat hit me like a wall. It was one of those humid South Carolina days where your shirt sticks to your back in seconds. The dogs were going nuts, lunging at the fence and barking like they were trying to tear something apart. At first, I thought maybe it was a bear. We get them sometimes, though not often, so I squinted against the sun, trying to see what was setting them off. And that's when I saw it. There was this large black figure hunched over near the pen, tugging at the wire like it was trying to rip it loose. My brain didn't process it right away. I took a couple steps closer, my boots crunching on the dry grass. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a bear. It was way too big, and it stood on 2 legs. I froze for a second, just staring, and my mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It had to be 8, maybe 8.5 feet tall, covered in thick, matted black hair that looked almost oily in the sunlight. Its face and chest were bare, showing this rough brown skin that reminded me of old leather. and when it turned its head slightly, I saw its eyes, round and dark, like two pools of ink, just staring right through me. But the worst part was its teeth. They were large and blocky, sticking out a little, and when it grunted, I could see them clearly. It had these worn patches on its knees, like it had been crawling or kneeling a lot, and the skin there was scraped and rough. The smell hit me then too. This weird, musky odor that smelled exactly like a goat, sharp and earthy, and it made my stomach turn. I'd never smelled anything like that out here before, and it just added to the wrongness of the whole thing. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a couple of seconds, but it felt like hours. My body was locked up, and I could feel this cold sweat breaking out all over me. Then it noticed me. It didn't just turn its head, it swung its whole body around to face me, and the movement was so fluid and fast that it didn't seem real. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I swear in that moment I felt this primal fear wash over me, the kind that makes your legs go weak. I didn't think, I just yelled this raw, guttural sound that tore out of my throat, and I turned and ran for the house. Running felt like I was moving through mud. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and every breath felt like I was sucking in fire. I didn't look back at first, but then I had to. I glanced over my shoulder and I saw it grunting, this low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground. It was thumping away into the woods, its huge body crashing through the underbrush, and the sound of it fading into the trees made me shudder. I kept running, my lungs burning, and I didn't stop until I slammed into the back door, fumbling with the handle because my hands were shaking so bad. My brother was in the kitchen. He'd been staying with me for a few weeks, helping out with some repairs, and he saw me burst in, pale and gasping. He asked what was wrong, his voice tight with alarm, and I just pointed out the window, my hand trembling. He looked out and his face went slack. He said he saw something big and dark disappearing into the trees, but he didn't get a clear view like I did. Still, he believed me right away because of the state I was in. We both stood there for a minute, just staring at each other, and the silence in the house felt heavier than before. We didn't go back outside that day. We locked all the doors and windows, and I kept peeking through the blinds, half expecting to see it staring back at me. The dogs had quieted down, but every now and then they'd let out a low growl, like they could still sense something out there. My brother and I didn't talk much. We just sat in the living room, jumping at every little noise. I remember my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I had this ache in my chest from how fast my heart had been racing. The goat-like smell seemed to linger in my nose, even inside, and it made me feel sick. As the afternoon dragged on, the sky started to darken and we heard thunder rumbling in the distance. A storm was rolling in, and by evening it was pouring rain, the kind of downpour that washes everything away. We didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house had us on edge, and I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head. The next morning, when the storm had passed, we finally worked up the courage to go outside. The ground was soaked, mud everywhere, and any tracks that might have been there were gone, washed clean by the rain. Part of me was relieved because I didn't want to see more evidence, but another part felt frustrated, like proof had been stolen from me. But I know what I saw. Those details are burned into my brain. The worn patches on its knees, the blocky teeth, the way it moved. I've been cautious ever since, always looking over my shoulder when I'm outside, especially around noon when the light plays tricks on the trees. I can't explain it, and I don't try to. It just happened, and sometimes when the wind blows just right, I catch a whiff of that goat-like smell, and my blood runs cold all over again. Story 13. It was one of those evenings that just felt normal, you know? The kind that doesn't stick in your memory for any reason at all, until it does, and then you can't forget a single second of it. This was last summer, late July. The heat of the day had broken, and a cool breeze was coming in, making the leaves on the big oak tree in our yard rustle. I was inside, washing up the dinner dishes, looking out the window every now and then to check on the kids. My two, a boy and a girl, were out on their bikes. They'd been cooped up all day, and they were just burning off that last bit of energy before bed. Our house in Jonesville is on the edge of town, where the backyards just sort of melt into woods. Not deep, scary woods, but the kind of woods you tell the kids not to go too far into because they might get turned around. They were just riding up and down our dead-end street, the crunch of their bike tires on the gravel, a familiar, comforting sound. I remember I had just put the last plate in the drying rack when the sound changed. It wasn't just the crunch of gravel anymore. It was that sound. The one every parent knows instantly. It's not a cry, it's not a shout, it's pure, undiluted terror coming out of your child's lungs, a high-pitched, shrieking panic that stops your heart cold. I dropped the dish towel and was out the front door in 2 seconds flat. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. They were pedaling toward the house, but they weren't just riding. They were frantic, their legs pumping in a jerky, wild way, like they were trying to run on their bikes. Their faces were white as sheets, their eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the house. They skidded to a stop in the driveway, their bikes clattering to the concrete, and they just fell into me, both of them at once, sobbing and shaking so violently I could barely hold them up. They were gasping for air, trying to talk, but the words were just broken, heaving sounds. I knelt down, holding them tight, my own hands trembling as I tried to soothe them. "What happened? What's wrong? Are you hurt?" I kept asking, my voice way higher and shakier than I wanted it to be. It took a few minutes for them to get any words out. They were both talking over each other. Their sentences, a jumbled mess of monster and big and in the trees, and it was looking at us. My mind immediately went to a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, though it's rare to see them so close to the houses. I was trying to calm them down, saying, "It's okay, it was probably just a bear, you scared it away." But my son, he grabbed my face with his little hands, his fingers cold and damp with sweat. He made me look right at him. His eyes were swimming with tears, but there was a stark, absolute certainty in them that chilled me to the bone. "It wasn't a bear, Mum," he choked out. "It walked on 2 legs, it was tall, it was hairy, and it smelled so bad." That's when the first real icicle of fear slid down my spine. A bear on 2 legs isn't a bear. I looked over at my daughter, and she was just nodding, her whole body still convulsing with silent sobs. She pointed a trembling finger back toward the end of the street, toward the line of trees where the streetlights didn't reach. "It was right there," she whispered. "It stepped out from behind the big pine tree. It watched us, then it took a step toward the road." I stood up, pulling them both close to my sides. I stared into the growing darkness at the end of the street. The woods were just a black wall now. I couldn't see anything, but I felt something. It's hard to describe, but the air felt different. Heavy. The usual evening sounds, the crickets, the frogs from the creek. They'd gone completely silent. It was an unnatural quiet, the kind that presses in on your eardrums. I hustled the kids inside, locking the door behind me and then going through the whole house, checking every lock on every window. My hands were still shaking. I sat them down on the couch and made them tell me everything slowly from the beginning. They said they were racing each other to the end of the street and back. On their last turn, as they were about to pedal back toward the house, my daughter saw movement. She thought it was a deer at first, but then it stepped fully out from behind the trunk of an old white pine. It was huge, they said, way taller than a man, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was covered in long, shaggy hair, dark brown or black. They couldn't tell in the fading light. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. But it was the face that got to me. They both described it the same way. It wasn't a gorilla's face. It was flatter, and it had eyes that held a kind of intelligence. My son said it looked curious, but not in a friendly way. It was a cold, calculating look. It just stood there, watching them. It didn't make a sound. No growl, no roar. Then, after what felt like forever, it took one long, slow step onto the gravel road. That's when they screamed and turned their bikes around. My daughter added the detail about the smell. She said it hit them just as they were pedaling away, a wave of stench that made her gag. She described it as a mix of rotten meat and old garbage and something else, something foul and musky she couldn't name. That sealed it for me. This wasn't their imagination. This wasn't a bear. The consistency, the specific, horrible details, the walking on two legs, the stench, the intelligent eyes. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. My skin was crawling. Something had been out there, something that had no business being in our quiet neighborhood, and it had scared my children half to death. I called the sheriff's office. My voice was still unsteady. I told the dispatcher that my children had seen a large animal, a creature at the end of our street. I felt stupid saying it, but the fear in my kids' eyes was real. I gave her our address. She said a deputy was on his way. The wait was agony. I kept the kids on the couch with me, all the lights in the house on, the TV off. We just sat there, listening. Every little creak of the house made us jump. I kept peering out the window, straining my eyes to see into the shadows at the edge of the yard. I didn't see anything move, but the feeling of being watched was so intense it was like a physical weight on my shoulders. Sheriff H.L. Phillips himself showed up. He's a big, solid man with a calm demeanor that usually makes you feel safer. But when I saw it was him, a new kind of dread settled in my stomach. The sheriff doesn't usually come out for a reported bear sighting. He came in, took off his hat, and his eyes went straight to my kids, who were still huddled together on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, even though it wasn't cold. He has kids of his own. He could see genuine terror when he saw it. He sat down and talked to them, not like they were silly children, but like they were witnesses. He was gentle, but he was thorough. He asked them to tell him exactly what they saw, and they did, repeating the same story, the same details, without any prompting from me. The height, the hair, the way it walked, the smell. Sheriff Phillips listened, his face grim. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell them it was probably just a shadow. He took notes. When they were done, he looked at me. "Mom, how long have you all lived in Jonesville?" "Just since the spring," I told him. "We moved here in April." He nodded slowly, like that explained something. He looked back down at his notepad, then up at me again. His next question is the one that's been echoing in my head ever since. He asked it quietly, seriously. "Have you folks heard any stories since you've been here? Any talk about the fall?" The word meant nothing to me. I just shook my head, confused. "The fall? No, sir. What's that?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked from me to my terrified children and then back to his notepad. He closed it. "We'll take a look around down there," he said, his voice low. "You keep your doors locked tonight." He stood up to leave, and as he was walking out, he paused at the door and turned back to me. The porch light cast shadows on his face, making him look tired and older. "If you hear anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "anything at all that doesn't sound right, you call us immediately. Don't go outside to investigate. Just call." Then he was gone. I locked the door behind him and stood there for a long time, just staring at the wood grain. The fowl. What was the fowl? The way he said it. It wasn't a question. It was a name. He knew what my kids had seen. He had a name for it. I got the kids to bed eventually. It took hours. They were afraid to be in their own rooms, so they slept with me. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there in the dark, listening. The normal night sounds had returned, the crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. But every time a branch tapped against the window, my whole body went rigid. Just before the first hint of dawn started to lighten the sky, I heard it. It wasn't a scream or a roar. It was a sound I've never heard before and hope I never hear again. It came from the woods, not too far from the house. It was a deep, guttural whoop, followed by a series of lower, resonant grunts. It was a communication. It sounded intelligent, and it sounded big. The sound didn't fade away. It just stopped, leaving a silence that was somehow louder than the noise itself. I lay there frozen, my children sleeping beside me, completely unaware. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It felt like a cold, hard stone in my chest. I knew, with a certainty that sank into my bones, that it was still out there. It had been watching the house. It had seen the sheriff come and go, and now it was just letting us know it was still there. We never saw it again. The sheriff's deputies found some large, indistinct footprints in the soft mud near the creek, but nothing conclusive. Life in Jonesville went back to normal for everyone else, but not for us. We don't let the kids play outside after dinner anymore. I look at the tree line every single day, a dozen times a day, and every night I lie awake for a while, just listening. I still don't know what the foul is. I've tried to ask a couple of the old-timers in town, but they just get quiet and change the subject. The sheriff never mentioned it again, but he didn't have to. That one word, the grim look on his face, and that horrible sound in the dead of night told me everything I needed to know. We'd stumbled into something old, something the town knows about but doesn't talk about, and it knew we were here. Story 14. I was 12 years old that summer, and my cousin Travis was 13. It was 1984, and we were spending a few weeks at our grandparents' place just outside of St. Charles, Arkansas. The days were long and sticky, the air so thick with humidity you could almost drink it. Our main occupation, our reason for being, was frog hunting. We had this old John boat, a flat-bottomed thing that had seen better days, and a temperamental outboard motor that was more a creature of habit than a piece of machinery. You had to know its moods. This one night, it was a Friday, I think, we decided to go deeper than we usually did, out into the real swampy lowlands around Muddy Fork Lake. We talked about it all day, the promise of the big bullfrogs that lived out there, the ones with legs as thick as a man's thumb. We'd get a good price for those. We waited until the sun was just a memory at the edge of the sky, the fireflies starting to blink in the trees, before we dragged the boat down the muddy bank and into the black water. The motor, true to form, coughed and sputtered before it finally caught, settling into a low, grumbling putter that was the only real sound besides the crickets and the occasional plop of a turtle sliding off a log. The water was like oil, dark and still, with a skin of pollen and green scum in the quieter corners. The cypress trees rose out of the water like giant, knobby-kneed skeletons, their Spanish moss hanging down, sometimes brushing against our faces as we puttered through the narrow channels. It felt like we were entering a different world, one that belonged to the night and the things that lived in it. We had our gigs, those long, three-pronged spears, and a big white igloo cooler with a little bit of water sloshing in the bottom. The routine was simple. Travis would run the boat, using an old flashlight with a dying battery to scan the banks. I'd stand in the front, gig at the ready, when the light caught the shine of a frog's eyes, that little red glow. Travis would cut the motor and we'd drift in silence. You had to be quick, and you had to be accurate. A miss meant a loud splash and no frog. We'd been at it for a couple of hours, and the cooler was about half full. The thrill of the hunt was starting to wear off, replaced by the nagging tiredness that comes with being out too late. The mosquitoes were finding every inch of exposed skin. I remember slapping my neck and feeling the warm, wet smear of my own blood and the bug's body. We were in a part of the lake I didn't recognize, a wide, still pool surrounded by a wall of cypress and tupelo gums. The air was dead calm. The flashlight beam was getting weaker, just a sickly yellow cone that didn't penetrate very far. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a sound you could mistake for anything else. It started low, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate right up through the bottom of the boat and into the bones of my feet. Then it rose, turning into this full-on scream. It wasn't a bobcat's shriek or a fox's cry. This was angry. It was a roar of pure, raw fury that echoed across the timber, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was so loud it felt like it was inside my head, pressing against my eardrums. Travis and I froze. I looked at him and his face was just a pale, wide-eyed circle in the gloom. The gig in my hand felt suddenly useless. A stupid toy. The sound died away, leaving a silence that was somehow louder and more terrifying than the scream itself. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to get out. "What the hell was that?" Travis whispered, his voice cracking. I just shook my head. I didn't have an answer. We were both staring into the blackness, trying to see something, anything. That's when I saw them, high up in a big cypress tree on the far bank, maybe 70 yards away. 2 points of red light. They weren't reflecting like an animal's eyes would. They were glowing, a dull, deep red, like hot coals. "Travis," I said, my voice a dry croak. "Look." He followed my gaze and I heard him suck in a sharp breath. The 2 red lights were just hanging there in the darkness. And then, the worst part, they moved. They shifted just slightly, and I knew with a cold certainty that sank into my gut that they were looking right at us. They were too high up, way too high for any animal I knew. A bear couldn't climb that high and just sit there. A deer doesn't have glowing red eyes. Panic is a physical thing. It's not just a feeling. It's a chemical reaction that floods your body. My mouth went dry. My hands started to shake. My bladder felt suddenly dangerously full. "Start the motor," Travis said, his voice tight. He was already grabbing one of the paddles from the bottom of the boat. I scrambled to the back, my legs feeling like rubber. The motor, the damn temperamental motor. I yanked the starter cord. Nothing. Just a hollow metallic cough. I pulled again, putting my whole weight into it. Another cough, a sputter, then silence. "Hurry up!" Travis hissed. He was paddling now, digging the blade into the black water, trying to turn us around. The boat moved sluggishly. I pulled the cord again. Nothing. I could feel those red eyes on me, burning into the back of my neck. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They were still there, unmoving. A part of my brain, the part that wasn't screaming, was trying to figure out the shape around them. The tree was thick, but between the branches, I could make out a massive dark shape. It was huge, and it was hairy. It wasn't the shaggy coat of a bear. It was just a darkness, a solid blackness that blotted out the stars behind it, with those 2 hellish red pinpoints in the middle. I pulled the cord again. This time, it roared to life. The sound was deafeningly loud in the quiet, a blessed, beautiful noise. I didn't even think. I shoved the throttle forward as far as it would go. The boat lurched, the bow rising up, and we shot forward. Travis dropped the paddle and held onto the sides. We weren't going back the way we came. That would have meant going directly towards that thing in the tree. Instead, I aimed for what looked like a narrow channel leading away, a ribbon of slightly less black water between 2 dense walls of vegetation. As we sped away, a smell hit us. It's a smell I will never, ever forget. It was a rotten, musky stench, like a combination of a wet dog, old meat, and something else, something foul and earthy, like a bog that had been stirred up from the bottom. It was so thick and heavy it was like a blanket, coating the inside of my nose and my throat. It was the smell of something dead and something alive all at once, and every single instinct in my body was screaming at me to get away from it, that this was wrong, this was danger. We raced into the channel. It was a terrible decision, but it was the only one we had. The channel was a tunnel, the trees on either side leaning in so their branches formed a canopy overhead, blotting out the little bit of starry sky. Our weak flashlight beam bounced off the twisting, turning walls of roots and leaves. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of the boat. I was driving blind, just praying the channel stayed deep enough. We were going too fast. The motor was screaming, the whole boat vibrating. Travis was half crouched, his knuckles white where he gripped the gunnel. We took a sharp turn, the boat leaning hard, and that's when it happened. There was a sickening, grinding crunch from under us. A jolt threw me forward, and I almost went overboard. The motor made a horrible, high-pitched whine, and then died. Instantly. The silence was absolute and terrifying. We were stuck. Tilted slightly to one side, I looked over the edge and saw we'd hit a submerged stump, probably an old cypress knee. The propeller was likely fouled or bent. We were dead in the water. In that silence we heard it. From back the way we came, from the direction of that thing in the tree, there was a sound of breaking branches, not little snaps. These were loud, wet cracks, the sound of something big and heavy moving through the forest. And it was moving fast. It was crashing through the undergrowth, coming straight for the water, for us. I was fumbling with the motor, my fingers slick with sweat and panic. I couldn't see what was wrong. It was too dark. Travis was just staring back down the channel, his face a mask of pure terror. The crashing got louder. It was at the water's edge now. I could hear splashing, not the gentle lapping of water, but heavy, sloshing steps, like something massive was wading into the channel behind us. The rotten, musky smell came back stronger than ever, so overpowering I gagged. This was it. I was sure of it. We were about to be attacked. We were going to be pulled out of this boat and dragged into the dark water. My whole life didn't flash before my eyes. There was no time for that. There was only the deafening thump of my own heart, the cold sweat on my skin, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth, and the certain knowledge that we were about to die. I grabbed the starter cord again. It was a pointless gesture, a last, desperate act. I yanked. The motor coughed, sputtered. For a second, I thought it would die again. Then it roared, a ragged, unhealthy sound, but it was running. I didn't wait. I jammed the throttle. The boat shuddered, scraped horribly against the stump, and then broke free. We shot forward like a cork from a bottle. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on the sliver of water in front of me, weaving through the winding channel, branches whipping and slapping at our faces and arms. I didn't care. All that mattered was forward. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, the channel opened up. We burst out into the wider, familiar part of Muddy Fork Lake. I didn't slow down. I kept the throttle wide open, the boat skipping across the smaller waves. I headed for the lights of my grandparents' house, a distant, fuzzy glow on the far shore. I aimed the boat straight for it. We hit the shoreline at full speed. The impact was brutal. It threw me from the seat, and I landed hard in the bottom of the boat. The wind knocked out of me. Travis was thrown against the cooler, which tipped over, sending our hard-won frog spilling out, hopping and scrambling into the night. The motor screamed as the propeller bit into mud, and then went silent for good. We lay there for a second, stunned, gasping for air. Then we scrambled out of the boat, falling onto the muddy bank, our legs too weak to hold us. We just sat there, trembling, covered in mud and scratches, staring back out at the black, silent lake. We told our grandparents, our parents when they came to get us. We told them about the scream, the red eyes, the smell, the chase. They listened, and then they laughed. They said it was a bear, maybe a panther, that our imaginations had gotten the best of us in the dark. They said the red eyes were probably just reflections from a boat light. Even though we hadn't seen another soul out there, they patted our heads and told us we were safe now, but we knew. Travis and I, we knew. We never went frog hunting in that part of the lake again. We never even went out on the water after dark. For years, the whole thing became a family joke. The night the boys got spooked by a hoot owl. It wasn't until decades later, just a few years ago, that Travis and I actually talked about it properly. We were on the phone, and it came up. And he said the same thing I'd always felt. He said, "You know, I've never said this out loud to anyone, but that wasn't a bear." I knew exactly what he meant. The height of those eyes, the sheer size of the thing in the tree, the sound of its scream, the smell, The way it moved through the woods, so fast and so heavy, it wasn't any animal from any book. I am convinced to this day that what we saw that night in the swamp outside St. Charles was a Bigfoot. I don't care how crazy that sounds. I was there. I smelled it. I felt its hateful glare from across the water. I heard it coming for us. I'm a grown man now, with kids of my own, but I still have nightmares about those glowing red eyes in the cypress tree and that overwhelming stench of decay. And I have kept the vow we made that night, huddled and shaking on the bank. I have never, ever set foot in that channel after dark again. Story 15. It was March 2017, and I'll never forget that morning as long as I live. I'm a rancher, been one my whole life out here in eastern Texas, and I'm used to the rough and tumble of country living. Predators sneaking around, bad weather, you name it. But what happened that day? It changed something in me, and I still get the shivers thinking about it. I woke up just before dawn, like I always do. The air was cool and damp, with that familiar smell of wet grass and dirt. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside, planning to check on the animals before the sun fully rose. Everything seemed normal at first. The cows were lowing softly in the pasture, and the sky was turning a pale gray. But as I walked toward the chicken coop, my stomach dropped. The coop door was hanging off its hinges, all twisted and bent out of shape. The heavy wire mesh we'd put up was ripped apart like it was nothing, and boards were splintered everywhere. Feathers were scattered all over the ground, white and brown ones stuck in the mud, and when I got closer I saw a couple of our chickens lying dead. Their necks snapped clean. 5 others were just gone. My heart started pounding hard in my chest. At first I thought it might have been a coyote or a wild dog, but the damage was too severe. I've seen coops torn up before, but this was different. The wire was twisted in a way that didn't look like any animal I knew. I called out for my wife and my teenage son, and they came running out, still in their pajamas. Their faces went pale when they saw the mess. My wife gasped, and my son just stared, his eyes wide. We've had losses before, but this felt personal, like something had targeted us. We started looking around, and that's when we saw the footprints. They were huge. I mean massive, about 16 inches long and shaped like a human foot, but way bigger. They led away from the coop toward the creek that runs through the back of our property. The ground was soft from recent rains, so the prints were clear and deep, like whatever made them was heavy. My son pointed out that they had 5 toes, and the stride was long, like it was walking steadily, not running. We all just stood there for a minute, not saying much. I felt a cold knot tighten in my gut. This wasn't right. After a quick discussion, we decided to follow the tracks. I grabbed my rifle. Not that I thought it'd do much good, but it made me feel a bit safer. My wife insisted on coming along, and my son was determined too. The 3 of us started walking, following those prints through the tall grass and toward the trees. The sun was up by then, casting long shadows, and the woods ahead looked darker than usual. I could hear the creek babbling in the distance, and the air felt heavy, like before a storm. As we got closer to the creek, the tracks led us into a thicker part of the woods. The underbrush was dense, and we had to push aside branches to keep going. My heart was racing now, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back, even though it wasn't hot. My wife was holding onto my arm, her grip tight, and my son was right behind us, his breath coming in short puffs. We were all on edge, scanning the trees for any movement. That's when we saw it. About 50 yards ahead, near the creek bank, there was this massive figure. It was tall, over 8 feet easy, and covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the morning light. It was standing with its back to us at first, and I could see it was holding 2 of our chickens under one arm. They were still alive, squirming a little. The creature was huge, broad-shouldered, and it moved with a calm, steady grace that didn't fit its size. We froze, all of us. I don't think any of us breathed for a second. Then it turned. slowly, like it knew we were there all along. Its face was broad, with deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through us. They weren't wild or angry, just calm, intelligent, like it was sizing us up. It didn't make a sound, just held our gaze for what felt like forever. I could see the muscles in its arms ripple as it adjusted its grip on the chickens. My legs felt like jelly, and I had this overwhelming urge to run, but I couldn't move. My wife's hand tightened on my arm, and I heard my son whisper, "Dad, what is that?" The creature didn't seem threatened by us at all. After a moment, it turned back around and started walking away, heading deeper into the woods. Its steps were quiet for something so big, barely making a sound on the forest floor. We just stood there, watching it disappear into the trees. When it was gone, the spell broke, and we all started talking at once, our voices shaky. My son was asking if it was a bear, but I knew it wasn't. Bears don't walk upright like that, and they don't have that kind of calmness. My wife was trembling, and I put an arm around her, feeling how cold her skin was. We hurried back to the house, not saying much on the way. Every rustle in the bushes made us jump. When we got inside, we locked the doors and windows, even though it was broad daylight. I kept replaying that moment in my head. The way it looked at us, like it was just curious, not afraid. That's what got to me the most. It wasn't aggressive, it was almost respectful in a weird way. But that made it scarier, because it meant it was thinking, not just acting on instinct. Later that day, we went back out to assess the damage properly. The musky odor was still lingering around the coop, a strong, earthy smell, like wet dog and old leaves mixed together. It clung to the air, and even hours later I could catch whiffs of it. We decided to reinforce the coop right away, using heavier wood and extra wire. My son and I worked on it while my wife kept watch, her eyes darting toward the woods every few seconds. We were all on high alert, jumping at every little noise. As evening fell, we started hearing things. Deep grunts came from the woods, low and guttural, like nothing I'd ever heard before. Then there were knocks, like someone was hitting a tree with a big stick. They'd come in bursts, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. We huddled inside, with all the lights off except for a few we'd left on outside to scare anything off. I sat by the window with my rifle, watching the tree line. My wife was next to me, and my son was on the couch, trying to act brave, but I could see the fear in his eyes. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature's face. The next morning, we found more footprints around the barn, and high up on the barn door, there was a handprint, massive, with long fingers, pressed into the wood like it had been reaching for something. It was way above where a person could reach, even on tiptoe. That sealed it for me. Whatever this was, it wasn't just passing through. We spent the next few days reinforcing everything, putting up brighter lights, adding more fences, and making sure the animals were secure. Thankfully, the disturbances stopped after that. No more missing chickens, no more sounds at night. But the memory of that encounter stuck with me. Even now, when I'm out near the woods after dark, I get this uneasy feeling, like I'm being watched. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that it was real, and it changed how I see the world. Something that big, that calm, that intelligent. It's out there, and I hope I never cross paths with it again. Done. Story 16. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, and I guess I need to get it out there. Maybe typing it all down will help, or maybe it'll just make me relive the whole thing again, but here goes. This happened about 2 months ago, and I still get this tightness in my chest whenever I think about it. I was driving back from the beach with my younger sister. We'd spent the day out near the coast, just relaxing, you know, nothing out of the ordinary. We stopped at this barbecue place on the way home, one of those roadside joints that smells like smoke and grilled meat from a mile away. I remember we both got pulled pork sandwiches, and I had a sweet tea that was so sugary it made my teeth ache. We were full and tired, just ready to get home and crash. It was a Friday night, and we were heading back to our place near Johnston County Airport in North Carolina. The roads out there are pretty rural, Lots of trees, not many streetlights, and that deep kind of darkness that settles in once the sun goes down. I've driven these roads 100 times, so I wasn't thinking twice about it. My sister was in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, probably looking at pictures from the beach. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the low buzz of the radio playing some old country station. I remember feeling the stickiness from the beach air still on my skin, and my shorts were damp from where I'd sat on the sand earlier. We'd just turned onto Cleveland Road. It was around 9:15 p.m. because I glanced at the clock right before I made the turn. The road is narrow, with woods crowding in on both sides, and the asphalt is cracked in places. Up ahead, on the shoulder, there was this old car parked off to the side. It was one of those beat-up sedans from the 90s, paint peeling and one tire looking flat. It was angled kind of weird, like someone had just abandoned it there, and it blocked part of my view of the road ahead. I remember thinking it was odd because you don't see many cars parked out here at night, but I didn't slow down too much, just eased off the gas a little. That's when I saw the eyes. They were reflecting in my headlights, 2 points of light that glowed bright and steady, like animal eyes do. At first I thought it was a deer, or maybe a dog. We get those around here all the time. I slowed down more, my foot hovering over the brake. My sister looked up from her phone and asked, "What is it?" I didn't answer right away because I was squinting, trying to make out what it was. The headlights cut through the darkness, and as I got closer, the shape started to come into focus. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a dog, and it sure as hell wasn't a person. This thing was tall, like really tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this was way taller than me. Later, I'd guess it was around 6'11" or 7 feet, but in the moment, it just felt massive. It was standing upright on 2 legs, but its proportions were all wrong. Its legs were long and kind of skinny, but its arms hung down past its knees, swinging slightly as if it had just stepped out of the trees. The whole body was covered in dark, matted hair, almost black, but in the headlights it had a kind of oily sheen to it. The face. God. I don't even want to describe the face. It was broad, with no visible ears that I could see, and those eyes. They weren't like any animal I've ever seen. They were set deep, and the reflection was this piercing yellow-green. But there was an intelligence behind them that made my stomach drop. I must have slowed to a crawl because the car was barely moving now. My sister gasped, and I heard her phone clatter to the floor. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I couldn't answer. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed something too big. I just stared, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The creature didn't move toward us or away. It just stood there, maybe 20 feet ahead, partly illuminated by my headlights. Its chest was broad, and I could see muscles shifting under that dark hair. It didn't make a sound, but the air around us felt heavy, charged with something I can't explain. My mind was racing, trying to place what this could be. A bear? No. Bears around here are smaller, and they don't stand that straight. Plus the arms were too long, and the way it was balanced, it was all wrong. This was something else, something I'd never seen before, not even in pictures. My sister started to whimper, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The dashboard lights cast a faint glow inside the car, and I could see her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Drive, please, just drive," she begged. But I was frozen for a second longer. I kept staring at it, taking in details I wish I could forget. The hair on its arms was longer near the wrists, almost like fur, and its feet were big and splayed, but I couldn't see them clearly because of the shadows. It had a kind of hunched posture, but not like it was weak, more like it was coiled, ready to move. There was a smell too, now that I think about it. I hadn't noticed at first, but with the windows up, a faint odor seeped in, like wet earth and something rotten, like old meat left out too long. It made my nose wrinkle, and I felt a wave of nausea. That's when the fear really hit me. Not just scared, but this deep, primal terror that made my heart pound so hard I could feel it in my ears. My sister was crying softly now, her hands covering her mouth. I knew I had to get us out of there. Our house was only a minute away, just down this road and a left turn. But in that moment, it felt like miles. I forced my foot onto the gas pedal, but it was like moving through mud. The car lurched forward, and I swerved slightly to avoid getting too close to the thing. As I passed it, I couldn't help but look. Its head turned slowly, following the car, and those eyes locked with mine for a split second. I felt a chill run down my spine, like ice water had been poured over me. There was no expression on its face, but the intensity in its gaze was overwhelming. It was like it was studying us, memorizing every detail. I stomped on the accelerator, and the engine roared as we sped away. In the rearview mirror, I saw it still standing there, a dark silhouette against the trees, before the curve in the road hid it from view. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My sister was sobbing now, curled up in her seat, and I was shaking so bad I had to white-knuckle the wheel to keep us on the road. I kept checking the mirror, expecting to see it following us, but there was nothing. The woods looked darker than ever, and every shadow seemed to move. When we pulled into our driveway, I didn't even turn off the engine right away. I just sat there, breathing heavy, my heart still racing. The house was dark, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. Inside, we didn't say much. I locked the door behind us and checked all the windows, making sure they were shut tight. My sister went straight to her room and closed the door, and I could hear her crying through the wall. I tried to act normal, but every little noise made me jump. The fridge humming, the floor creaking, anything. I kept peeking out the windows, half expecting to see those eyes staring back from the tree line. Our yard backs up to the woods, and suddenly that felt way too close. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing standing there, its long arms and those piercing eyes. I'd doze off for a few minutes, then jerk awake, convinced I'd heard something outside. Around 3 in the morning, I thought I heard a low grunting sound from the woods, but it might have just been my imagination running wild. The room felt too hot, then too cold, and I kept sweating through my sheets. My mind kept replaying the encounter over and over, trying to make sense of it, but there was no sense to be made. It was just wrong. The next morning, the sun came up, and everything looked normal. Birds were chirping, and the sky was clear. It felt like the world had reset, but I couldn't shake the unease. After my sister woke up, she'd barely slept either. We didn't talk about it much. She just looked at me with this haunted expression, and I knew she was feeling the same fear. I decided to go back to the spot to see if I could find any evidence, anything that proved it wasn't just a nightmare. I drove back to Cleveland Road, this time in broad daylight. The old car was still there on the shoulder, looking even more decrepit in the sun. I parked a safe distance away and got out, my legs feeling weak. The ground was dry and hard from lack of rain, covered in leaves and pine needles. I walked to where I'd seen the creature, scanning the area for tracks, broken branches, anything. But there was nothing. No footprints, no disturbed earth, no hair caught on the bushes. It was like it had never been there at all. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the spot, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. Part of me wanted to find something, to confirm I wasn't going crazy, but another part was glad there was no trace. I haven't seen it since that night, and I've driven that road a few times since, always during the day, always with my heart in my throat, but the memory, it's stuck with me. I'll be doing something normal, like washing dishes or watching TV, and suddenly I'll remember those eyes, that smell, the way it stood so still. My sister doesn't like to talk about it, and I don't blame her. Sometimes, though, I catch her looking out the window at night, and I know she's thinking about it too. I don't know what it was. A bear, some kind of animal I've never seen, or something else entirely. All I know is that it felt real. and it scared the hell out of me. I've told a couple of people, but they just shrug it off or make jokes about Bigfoot. Maybe it was. I don't know. But it didn't feel like a story or a myth. It felt like a threat, something that shouldn't be there. And now, every time I'm out on a dark road, I can't help but watch for those reflecting eyes, wondering if I'll ever see them again. Story 17. I've lived on this property for 10 years, a whole decade. It's not some remote cabin in the wilderness, but it's not in a suburb either. It's just my place. A few acres, a decent-sized house, and woods that seem to go on forever behind the backyard. I've got a tall, sturdy fence for my dogs, 2 of them, a big German Shepherd mix named Duke, and a smaller, scrappy mutt I just call Lady. They're good dogs, protective but not neurotic. They bark at deer, at raccoons, at the occasional possum waddling through. It's normal. It's part of living out here. This was last Tuesday night, or I guess very early Wednesday morning. It was around 1:30 in the morning. I'd been asleep for a few hours, the kind of deep, dead sleep you get when you've been working outside all day. The kind where you don't even dream. The barking woke me up. Not the usual half-hearted, hey, something's moving bark. This was different. This was pure, unfiltered aggression, a deep guttural roar from Duke, and a higher-pitched, frantic, almost panicked yelping from Lady. It was the kind of barking that drills right through your skull and jolts you awake with a shot of adrenaline. My heart was already hammering against my ribs before I was even fully conscious. I lay there for a second, trying to shake off the sleep, hoping they'd stop. They didn't. It just got more intense. I sighed, annoyed. I figured it was probably a deer that had gotten too close to the fence, or maybe a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, but they usually steer clear of the house. I swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold. I was just in my boxers. I didn't bother with a shirt or pants. I just padded through the dark house, through the kitchen, and unlocked the back door. I stepped out onto the back porch. The wood was rough and chilly under my bare feet. The night air was cool, but not cold. It was that heavy, damp air you get before dawn. The moon was out, casting these long, weird shadows from the trees at the edge of my property, right where the fence line meets the woods. Both dogs were at the far end of the yard, right up against the fence, their bodies rigid. Duke's hackles were up so high, he looked like a different animal. They weren't looking into the yard. They were staring, fixated, into the absolute blackness of the tree line about 50 feet away. They were barking themselves hoarse, snarling, throwing themselves at the fence. It was terrifying to see. They were scared. I'd never seen Duke scared of anything. "Hey, knock it off!" I yelled, my voice rough with sleep. They ignored me completely. That never happens. They always come when I call them. Always. And that's when I heard it. Over the barking. Under the barking, through the barking, a sound that made the fine hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand straight up. Thump, thump, thump. It was a footstep, a heavy, rhythmic, 2-legged footstep. There was a weight to it, a solid, dense thud that I could feel in the soles of my feet through the porch boards. It wasn't the light, skittering sound of a deer. It wasn't the 4-legged loping gait of a bear. This was something walking on 2 legs, something big. Each step had a deliberate, steady pace. Thump, thump, thump. My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back inside. But I couldn't just leave my dogs out there. I took a step forward, off the porch and onto the grass. The dew was ice cold. "Duke, Lady, get over here now," I commanded, trying to put as much authority into my voice as I could muster. Lady glanced back at me for a split second, her eyes wide and white with fear, let out a terrified whine, and then immediately turned back to the woods, barking even more frantically. Duke didn't even flinch. He was locked on. The footsteps stopped. The sudden silence was worse. The dogs kept barking, but now it was just their noise, and the silence from the woods felt attentive. It felt like whatever was out there had stopped to listen to me. I ran back inside. My heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I fumbled for the heavy-duty flashlight I keep on a shelf by the door, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I clicked it on, and the bright beam cut through the kitchen. Then I went to the cabinet where I keep my pistol. It's a 9mm. I'm not a gun nut, but I live alone out here. It's for peace of mind. I grabbed the magazine, slammed it home, and racked the slide. The sound was brutally loud in the quiet house. I'm not a tough guy. In that moment, holding that gun, I've never felt less tough in my entire life. I felt like a kid holding a toy, pretending to be brave. I went back to the door, the cold metal of the gun grip in one hand, the heavy flashlight in the other. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and stepped back out onto the porch. I shone the flashlight beam toward the tree line, sweeping it back and forth. The beam was powerful, but the woods are dense. It just illuminated the first few rows of trees, turning them into stark black and white silhouettes, and made the darkness beyond seem even deeper, even more impenetrable. I couldn't see anything. No eyeshine, no movement. The dogs were still going insane, and then it screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It wasn't an animal scream I'd ever heard. It was a shriek that seemed to tear right through the fabric of the night. It was impossibly loud, a high-pitched, grating, raw sound that was full of rage and, I don't know, challenge. It felt like a physical force hitting me in the chest. I actually stumbled back a step. The dogs instantly fell silent. Duke let out a low, terrified groan and backed away from the fence, his tail tucked so far between his legs it was gone. Lady just flattened herself on the ground, trembling. My own fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp terror that was so total it was almost peaceful. This was it. Something was very, very wrong. "Get out of here!" I yelled into the darkness, my voice cracking. It sounded pathetic. "I've got a gun! I'll let the dogs loose, I'll shoot!" As if on cue, both dogs scrambled past me, their claws scraping on the porch wood, and bolted through the open door into the house. They didn't stop there. I could hear them running through the kitchen, probably to hide under my bed. They abandoned their post. They abandoned me. I was alone on the porch. I raised the pistol. My hands were shaking so violently I knew I'd never hit anything. I wasn't trying to hit anything. I just wanted it to go away. I pointed the barrel down at the dirt path that leads from the porch to the garden, away from the woods, and I pulled the trigger. Bang! The report was deafening. The flash lit up the yard for an instant. Nothing, no sound from the woods. I fired again. Bang! Still nothing. The silence was a heavy, living thing. I fired a third shot. Bang! And then the world exploded. The moment the sound of the third shot faded, something in the woods moved. I didn't see it. I heard it. I felt it. It was a sudden, massive rustling and cracking of branches, like a tree being shoved aside, and then it charged. It was coming right for the house, right for me. The sound of its movement was a torrent, a crashing wave of destruction plowing through the undergrowth. It was fast, unbelievably, horrifyingly fast. It wasn't running through the trees. It was just bulldozing its way through whatever was in its path. I could hear small trees snapping. I could feel the vibrations of its footfalls through the ground, and it was shrieking, that same awful, tearing shriek. But now it was mixed with this deep, guttural howl that was all fury. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard, or ever will hear. I stood there, frozen, the flashlight beam jerking wildly across the yard as my arm shook. I couldn't see it. The beam just hit the wall of trees, catching glimpses of shaking leaves and branches, but the thing itself, the source of all that noise and power, was staying just outside the light. It was using the darkness. It knew. It felt huge, the sound of its movement, the force of it. It felt like something the size of a grizzly, but moving on two legs, with a speed and purpose that was just Wrong. It stopped just at the edge of the tree line. I could still hear it breathing. It was a heavy, wet, rasping sound, like a bellows. I could smell it too. A wave of stench washed over me, a mix of wet dog, rotten meat, and something else. Something foul and musky that I can't even describe. It made my eyes water. I was backing towards the door, my legs feeling like rubber. I couldn't turn my back on it. I kept the flashlight and the gun pointed more or less in its direction. My finger was on the trigger, but I was too scared to pull it. What if I missed? What if I just made it angrier? We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Me on the porch, it in the shadows, just breathing. I could feel it watching me. I've never been so certain of anything in my life. I could feel its gaze like a physical pressure. And then it did something that I still can't wrap my head around. From the woods, clear as day, came 3 loud, solid, deliberate knocks. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of something huge and solid hitting wood. A tree trunk. The knocks were perfectly spaced. A dark, mocking echo of my 3 gunshots. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just an animal. An animal doesn't do that. An animal doesn't communicate like that. An animal doesn't mimic. That's when the real deep-seated horror set in, the kind that sinks into your bones and stays there. This wasn't just a dangerous creature. This was something intelligent. It was playing with me. I finally managed to stumble backwards through the door, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt. I leaned against it, my whole body trembling, sweat pouring down my back despite the cool air. I was gasping for breath, but it wasn't over. I went to the kitchen window, peering through the blinds. I couldn't see anything. I moved to the living room window, which has a slightly different angle on the backyard. As soon as I got there, I heard a heavy thump from the direction of the woods, followed by the sound of something moving, circling to my left. It was following me. It was tracking my movement from inside the house. I tested it. I crept back to the kitchen window. A few seconds later, I heard it move again, repositioning itself. A cold dread, colder than anything I'd felt yet, settled in my stomach. It was letting me know it was still there. It was letting me know it knew exactly where I was. This went on for over an hour. Me moving from window to window, it shadowing me from the cover of the trees, occasionally letting out a low growl or knocking on a tree just to remind me. I was a prisoner in my own home. I found my dogs huddled together in the bathtub, a place they never go. They were shaking, and when I reached out to touch Duke, he flinched. Eventually the sounds stopped, the movement ceased, the presence just faded. The woods went quiet again, the normal sounds of crickets and frogs slowly returning, which somehow made it even creepier. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the front door, the gun in my lap, until the sun came up. The first rays of light filtering through the windows felt like a pardon from a death sentence. As soon as it was fully light, I went outside. My legs were still weak. The yard was a mess. The grass was torn up in a straight line from the tree line to about 20 feet from my house, as if something massive had just run a path through it. There were deep, obvious footprints in the soft earth. They were huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and I placed my foot next to one of the prints. It was easily half again as long and twice as wide. The shape was human-like, but the proportions were all wrong, and the depth of the impression suggested something unbelievably heavy. And then I saw the fur, caught on a broken branch of a small sapling that had been snapped in half near the fence. It was a tuft of coarse, wiry hair, about 4 inches long, and a dull, matted brown color. It didn't look like bear fur. It didn't look like anything I've ever seen. But the worst part, the thing that sealed it for me, was about 30 feet into the woods. A young tree, maybe 6 inches in diameter, was just uprooted. Not broken, uprooted. The root ball was pulled right out of the ground, and the trunk was tossed aside like a toy. The ground around it was churned up, and there were more of those massive footprints. I stood there, looking at that torn-up earth, that footprint, that tuft of fur in my hand, and I felt the world tilt. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination. Something had been here, something that walked on two legs, that screamed a challenge, that mimicked my gunshots, that shadowed me through my own house, and that could uproot a tree like it was nothing. I went back inside. I locked the door. And for the first time in the 10 years I've lived here, I went around and pushed every piece of furniture I could move against every single door and ground floor window. I barricaded myself in. I'm still barricaded in. The dogs won't go outside unless I'm right there with them, and even then, they whine and pull on their leashes to get back in. They won't go near the back fence. I don't know what it was. I've heard the stories, the local legends, but I always dismissed them as campfire tales. I don't dismiss them anymore. I saw the evidence, I felt its presence, I heard its intelligence. It was here, and a part of me is absolutely convinced that it's still out there, watching, waiting. I can feel it. Even now, in the middle of the day with the sun shining, that feeling of being watched hasn't gone away. It's just waiting, and I don't know what it's waiting for. Story 18. We were going night hunting. It was something we did a lot. My dad believed it taught you patience and respect for the land. We weren't after anything in particular that night, just whatever might be moving, probably hogs. The truck was an old Ford, green and beat up, and the inside always smelled of oil, dirt, and my dad's cigarettes. We'd packed a couple of thermoses of coffee, our rifles, and our two bulldogs, Brutus and Buster. Now you have to understand these dogs. They weren't pets, they were partners. Brutus was a big, ugly white bulldog with a jaw that could probably crack a cinder block. Buster was smaller, a brindle, but twice as mean. I'd seen them take on a 300-pound boar without a second thought. They'd get this low growl in their throats, their whole bodies would go stiff, and then they'd just launch themselves. Fear wasn't a word in their dictionary. They lived in the bed of the truck, and when we'd go hunting, they'd be pacing back there, whining with excitement, ready to go. We drove for about an hour, just me and him, not talking much. The headlights cut through the blackness, showing nothing but the crushed shell road and walls of saw palmetto on either side. We were on a big piece of private land a friend of his let us use. It was mostly flat fields that butted right up against a cypress swamp and some thick oak hammocks, the kind of place where the trees get all twisted and covered in Spanish moss, and the ground is just soft black muck. We finally pulled up to the spot he had in mind. It was the edge of one of these fields, right where it dipped down into a draw. A draw is like a shallow, grassy valley that leads into the thicker woods. This one went down and then disappeared into a tunnel of live oaks and cypress knees. We parked with the truck facing the draw, the headlights shining down into the mouth of it, maybe 30 yards away. The engine ticked as it cooled down. My dad killed the lights, and the world just vanished. It was that deep country dark where your eyes take forever to adjust, and even then, you're mostly just seeing shapes and shadows. The plan was simple. He was going to slap the side of the truck. The dogs would leap out and run down into the draw, hopefully spooking something out of the woods that we could get a shot at. It had worked 100 times before. He finished his cigarette, crushed it in the ashtray, and looked at me. "Ready?" he said, his voice low. I just nodded. I had my rifle propped between my knees, the barrel cool against my leg. He opened his door, the interior light clicking on and blinding us for a second. He stepped out, and I heard his boots crunch on the gravel. I saw his shadow move past my window. Then he did it. He raised his hand and slapped the metal side of the truck hard. Bam! 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 "Go on! Get 'em!" he yelled. Nothing happened. No scrambling of claws on the truck bed. No barking. Nothing. That was the first thing that was wrong. The absolute first sign. It was so quiet it was loud. My dad stood there for a second, and I saw his silhouette turn back toward the truck bed. He slapped it again, harder this time. "Brutus, Buster, go on!" That's when I heard it. a sound I had never ever heard from either of them before. It was a low, trembling whine. It wasn't a sound of excitement or frustration. It was pure, undiluted fear. I turned in my seat and craned my neck to look through the sliding rear window into the bed of the truck. In the faint glow from the dome light, I could see them. They weren't standing at the edge, ready to jump. They were pressed together in the far corner of the bed, as far away from the drawer as they could get. Brutus, this massive, fearless animal, was shaking. His whole body was quivering. Buster had his head down, pressed against Brutus's side, and he was letting out these pathetic, high-pitched whimpers. Their tails were tucked so far between their legs they were almost invisible. My dad saw it too. He came back to the open driver's side door and leaned in, his face confused in the dim light. "What in the hell is wrong with them?" he whispered. I just shook my head. I didn't know. I'd never seen anything like it. A cold knot started to form in my stomach. This wasn't right. This was all wrong. He got back in the truck and shut the door, plunging us into darkness again. The silence was heavy now, oppressive. The only sound was the frantic, shallow panting of the two dogs in the back. We both just sat there, staring out the windshield into the black hole of the drawer. That's when the smell hit us. It came in through the truck's vents, subtle at first, then overwhelming. It's hard to describe, but I'll try. It was like a combination of things, like rotten meat left out in the sun for a week, like a swamp that had been stirred up, releasing all the decay from the bottom. And underneath it all, this musky animal smell like a wet dog. But 1,000 times stronger and fouler. It was a physical presence, that smell. It coated the back of your throat and made you want to gag. My dad grimaced and put his hand over his nose. Jesus, what is that? A dead gator? But I knew it wasn't. The moment I smelled it, a memory clicked into place from years before. My mom and my older sister had come home from a fishing trip on the other side of the property one afternoon, white as ghosts. They said they'd been walking a trail back to the car and got hit with a smell so bad it made them vomit. They said they'd heard something huge crashing through the brush, but saw nothing. They refused to ever go back to that spot. I was just a kid then, and I'd forgotten about it. But smelling it now, in this context, it all came flooding back. This was the same smell. We were both frozen, just trying not to breathe too deeply. And then we heard it. From down in the drawer, deep in the trees where our headlights had been pointing earlier, came a sound. It was the sound of something big moving, not running, just walking. But it was a heavy sound, a solid, thumping sound with each step. You could hear branches snapping, not little twigs, but thick, wrist-sized stuff, cracking like gunshots in the quiet night. Crunch, thump, crunch, thump. My dad's hand went slowly to the dashboard and flicked on the headlights. The twin beams shot out, illuminating the grassy slope of the draw and the first line of trees, but the lights were old and yellow, and they didn't penetrate more than 20 yards into the woods. Beyond that, it was just a wall of blackness. We couldn't see anything, but we could still hear it. Crunch. Thump. It was moving parallel to us, just inside the tree line, staying just out of the light. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. My palms were slick with sweat on the stock of my rifle. This wasn't a deer. A deer is light and quick. This wasn't a hog. Hogs are noisy and chaotic. This was deliberate, heavy, methodical. Each step had a weight to it that you could feel in your chest. My dad reached for the big spotlight he had mounted on his door, the one we used for coon hunting. He clicked it on and swept the beam across the edge of the woods. The light was brighter, a stark white beam cutting through the darkness. It swept over gnarled oak trunks, hanging moss and thick ferns. For a second we saw nothing. Then the beam passed over a gap between two large cypress trees, and there was a shadow. It was just a flicker, a massive dark shape that moved the instant the light touched it. It was so fast, all I registered was a bulk, taller and wider than a man, and the fact that it was upright. It didn't drop to all fours. It didn't scramble. It just took one huge, swift step sideways and was gone, swallowed by the trees. The movement was unnervingly smooth for something that sounded so heavy. The sound of its movement stopped. The woods went dead silent. The crickets, the frogs, everything that had been making noise had just shut off. The only sound was the hum of the truck's engine and the terrified whimpers from the dogs in the back. That silence was worse than the noise. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. We were holding ours too. I don't think either of us moved a muscle. We just stared into that beam of light, waiting for something to happen. The smell was still there, thick and choking. Then, from the exact spot where we'd seen the shadow, there was a different sound. It wasn't a footstep, it was a low, deep, guttural growl. It wasn't like a dog's growl. It was lower, resonant, like it was coming from a barrel chest. It was a sound of pure warning, a sound that said, "This is my place. You are not welcome here." That was it for my dad. He didn't say a word, he just moved. He threw the spotlight switch off, yanked the gear shift into reverse, and stomped on the gas. The truck lurched backward, tires spinning and spitting shells and dirt. He didn't bother turning around. He just backed up the way we came, speeding backward down that dark road, one arm over the passenger seat, his head craned to see out the back window. The headlights swung wildly, lighting up the empty field we were leaving behind. I was thrown against the dashboard, my rifle clattering to the floor. I didn't care. I just wanted to be gone. He didn't slow down until we were a good half-mile away, back on a wider gravel road. He finally spun the wheel, skidding the truck to a stop, facing the way back to the main highway. He sat there for a minute, both hands gripping the wheel, his knuckles white. He was breathing hard. I was too. I could feel my whole body trembling. The dogs in the back had finally stopped whining. They were just silent now, a different kind of scared. My dad looked over at me, his face pale in the glow from the dashboard. He reached for his pack of cigarettes with a shaking hand, lit one, and took a long drag. He blew the smoke out in a rush. He stared straight ahead through the windshield, not at me. And he said it, just 3 words, his voice quiet and completely serious. "Skunk ape," he said. We never talked about it much after that. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd heard, what we'd smelled, what the dogs had felt. We'd been in those woods our whole lives. We knew every animal in them, and that wasn't any animal we knew. We never went back to that particular spot. A few years later, that whole parcel of land got sold and developed. They put up a subdivision. I sometimes wonder if any of the people living in those houses ever wake up in the middle of the night to a foul smell drifting in through an open window, or hear something heavy moving through the few remaining patches of woods behind their backyard. I wonder if they just shrug it off, or if they lie there in the dark, frozen with a cold knot of fear in their stomach, just like I was all those years ago. That's it. That's what happened. I've never been able to explain it. I don't know what it was. I just know that it was real, and it was there. And for one long, terrifying night in the fall of 1976, we were the ones who were hunted. Story 19. It was September, the kind of September you only get in the Bitterroots. The air was so crisp it felt like it was cleaning your lungs from the inside out, and the leaves were just starting to turn, these flashes of gold and fire red against all that dark green pine. I was in my early 30s then, fit, confident, an avid hunter. I'd been coming to these mountains since I was a kid with my dad. I knew how to handle myself. This trip was a solo scouting mission. 4 days alone to find where the elk were moving before the season opened properly. I was excited. It was supposed to be a recharge. The first couple of days were perfect, quiet, the kind of quiet that's so deep it almost has a sound of its own, a low hum in your ears. I'd set up camp in a small clearing, a good 2-hour hike from where I'd left my truck, a spot I'd used before. It was near a creek, so I had fresh water. My tent was a good one, a three-season dome that felt like a little fortress. I felt at home. But the nightmares started on the second night. Not just bad dreams, but something else. They were so vivid, so physical. I'd dream of this thing. It was always the same, a huge, hairy creature, just a dark mass of muscle and rage charging straight at me through the trees. It never made a sound in the dream. It was just this silent, unstoppable force. And I'd always wake up at the exact moment it was about to hit me. I'd jolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break out, the sleeping bag clinging to me, soaked with a cold sweat. I'd be gasping, my hands shaking. The fear was a taste in my mouth, metallic and sour. It felt so real. The imprint of that charge was left in my muscles. I'd be afraid to go back to sleep, just sitting there in the dark, listening to the normal night sounds, trying to convince myself it was just the altitude or something I ate. The third day, the day it happened, was weird from the start. The woods were too quiet. I didn't hear the usual chatter of squirrels, no bird song. It was like everything was holding its breath. I remember feeling a low-grade unease all day, a prickling on the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. I tried to write it off as being spooked from the dreams, but it felt different. This was outside of me. I cut my scouting short and was back at camp by mid-afternoon. I built a small fire, cooked my dinner, and the whole time I had this feeling of being watched. Not in a vague, paranoid way, it was a specific, heavy feeling. A pressure, like something was standing just beyond the tree line, in the deep shadows, and its entire focus was on me. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would reset everything. The nightmare came again, the same silent charge. This time, when I woke up, the sweat was ice cold on my skin. My digital watch said it was just after 2 in the morning. The inside of the tent was pitch black, and the forest outside was utterly silent. That deep hum of quiet was gone. It had been replaced by a void. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Not a cricket, not the creak, not a whisper of wind. And then I heard the breathing. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. It wasn't the snuffling of a bear or the light step of a deer. This was deep, rhythmic. Hoo, ha, hoo, ha. It was slow and measured, like something massive and patient, right outside the thin nylon wall of my tent, right by my head. I froze, every muscle in my body locked up. My mind was screaming, but I couldn't make a sound. I just lay there, curled in my bag, my eyes so wide open they started to dry out. Then came the low groan. It was a guttural sound, a vibration that I felt in the ground beneath my sleeping pad, more than I heard it with my ears. It was a sound of pure physical power, like a great tree straining at its roots. Right after that, the smell hit me. It was overwhelming. It smelled like wet dog, but 1,000 times stronger, mixed with the deep, rotten scent of old soil and something else, something metallic, like old blood. It filled the tent, thick and suffocating. I felt a touch on the tent wall. Not a bump, a deliberate slow drag, something rough like coarse hair or bark, brushed against the fabric near my feet. The whole tent shivered. I could hear the nylon rustle. My heart was beating so hard I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. That's when the scream started. It wasn't human, it wasn't an animal, it was something else entirely. It started low, a guttural growl that climbed and climbed into this piercing, shrieking roar that felt like it was tearing the air apart. It was deafening. It felt like it was inside my skull, vibrating my teeth. The sound circled my tent. I could hear the heavy thud, thud, thud of its footsteps shaking the ground as it moved around me. Each step was a solid impact, like someone was dropping logs onto the forest floor. The tent poles trembled. My water bottle, sitting in the corner, fell over with a plastic clatter. I was paralyzed. Pure, undiluted terror. This wasn't the fear of getting a ticket or failing a test. This was the ancient, primal fear of being prey. My body was flooded with it. I was shaking uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. I couldn't think. I could only feel this overwhelming need to be smaller, to disappear. Then the tent flap, the zippered door, started to move. It wasn't unzipping. It was being pushed inward. The mesh panel bulged, stretching the zipper to its limit. A shadow fell across it from the outside, blocking what little starlight there was. It was a human-shaped shadow, but all wrong. The head was too conical. The shoulders were impossibly broad. It was just a silhouette, but it was huge, filling the entire doorway. A hand, or what I guess was a hand, pressed against the bulge. It was massive, dark, and covered in what looked like thick, matted hair. I saw long, thick fingers splay out against the mesh. It wasn't clawed, not like a bear, but the sheer size of it made my stomach drop. It just rested there for a second, and then it brushed down. A slow, almost curious gesture. That broke the spell. The touch, the proximity, the reality of it. Something in me snapped. I wasn't thinking about my gear. My rifle propped against a tree outside, anything. There was only one command in my brain. Out! I scrambled backwards, out of my sleeping bag, fumbling for the rear vent of the tent. A small, low flap I used for airflow. I tore at the zipper, my fingers clumsy and numb with fear. I didn't care about the noise, I just had to get out. I spilled out onto the cold ground, wearing nothing but my long johns and a t-shirt. The cold air hit me like a slap. I scrambled on all fours, my hands and knees scraping on rocks and pine needles, and dove behind the biggest log I could see, a fallen cedar about 10 feet from the tent. I pressed myself into the damp, rotten wood, trying to make my body flat, trying to become part of the forest floor. I was gasping for air, my breath coming in ragged, silent sobs. I could smell the earth, the fungus on the log, and over it all that same stench of wet fur and decay. I dared to peek over the top of the log. It was standing right where I had just been. It's hard to even find the words. It was tall, 8 feet at least, maybe more. It was built like a power lifter, but scaled up. Enormous, rounded shoulders that sloped down to long, thick arms. Its entire body was covered in shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the dim light. It wasn't standing fully upright. It had a slight stoop, but it was still terrifyingly huge. Its head was large and sort of conical, with a heavy, protruding jaw. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, just dark pits in its face. It turned its head slowly, looking at my tent. It seemed agitated. It let out a low rumble, a sound that came from deep in its chest. Then, with a speed that was shocking for something so big, it raised one of its arms and slammed it down on my tent. It wasn't a swipe, it was a deliberate, powerful hammer blow. There was a loud crunch of snapping poles and tearing fabric. The dome collapsed instantly, flattened into a sad, shapeless pile on the ground. My home, my little fortress, was gone. Just like that. It stood over the wreckage, its chest heaving. Then it tilted its head back, opened that massive jaw, and roared. The sound was even more horroring from outside the tent. It wasn't just loud, it was a physical force. It felt like it punched me in the chest. It was a roar of pure, raw fury that echoed through the trees, silencing the entire world for a moment. The scream from before was terror. This was rage, and then it stopped. The roar cut off. Its head, which had been tilted back, slowly came down, and it turned. It turned and looked directly at the log I was hiding behind. I stopped breathing. My blood went cold. I was sure it could see me. I was sure it could hear my heart, smell my fear. I pressed my face into the damp wood, waiting for the end. I could hear its heavy breathing, that same ha, ha, from before. It took a step towards me, then another. I closed my eyes. This was it. But the footsteps didn't come closer. I heard a crunch of branches, a rustle of leaves. I risked opening one eye. It was moving away. It turned its back on me, and with a ground-shaking, loping gait, it ran into the woods. It didn't crash through the undergrowth like a bear. It moved with a powerful, fluid grace, disappearing between the dark trunks of the pines in seconds. The sound of its footsteps faded, and then there was nothing. I didn't move. I stayed behind that log for what felt like hours, shivering uncontrollably from cold and shock. The forest slowly started to come back to life. A bird chirped tentatively. The creek's gurgle became audible again. The sky in the east began to lighten from black to deep, bruised purple. When the first real rays of dawn hit the clearing, I finally forced myself to stand up. My legs were so weak I almost fell over. I walked on shaky feet to the remains of my tent. It was just a tangle of shredded nylon and broken poles. My sleeping bag was torn, my supplies were scattered, and that's when I saw them. The footprints. They were pressed deep into the soft earth near the creek bank. They were huge. I'm a big guy, size 12 boot, and I could have fit both of my feet inside one of these prints with room to spare. They were long, wide, with 5 distinct toes. They weren't blurry or misshapen like a bear's. They were clear, detailed, and utterly terrifyingly real. I didn't take pictures. I didn't make a cast. I didn't even think about it. All I could think was, I have to get out of here, now. I grabbed my backpack, which had been outside the tent. I scooped up my rifle. I left everything else, the tent, my sleeping bag, my cooking gear, all of it. I just started walking, following my own trail back to the truck. I walked fast, then I jogged, my head on a swivel, expecting to see that dark shape behind every tree. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I threw my gear in the back, got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I never reported it. Who would I tell? The Forest Service? The police? They'd think I was crazy, some hunter who got spooked by a bear and had a breakdown. Maybe that's what I wanted to believe, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know what I smelled. That was decades ago. I've never gone back to the Bitterroots. I stopped hunting altogether. The sound of that scream, the image of that massive hand pressing against my tent, the sight of it standing over the wreckage. It never left me. It's like a film reel that plays in my head when it's quiet. I can be sitting in my living room now, an old man, and if I let my mind drift, I'm right back there, 30 years old and terrified, hiding behind a log, with the smell of wet fur and earth filling my lungs, and the echo of that roar still ringing in my ears. I never understood what it was, or why it came to my camp that night. I just know that it was real, and that for a few minutes in the deep woods of Idaho, something immense and powerful knew I was there, and it wanted me to know it was there too. And then, it was just gone.